Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this morning's Education Executive. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Convener, we have apologies from Reverend Rollo, from the teacher representatives Fiona Craig and John Chalmers, and also from both our school pupil representatives Alice Dunn and Erin Laurie.
Okay. Thank you. I think our pupil representatives may well have other pressing matters on their mind as the exams are looming. And I just maybe take a minute or two to wish them well from the committee, as it will be, next committee will be after the exam period. Hope they do well. Okay, do we have any declarations of interest from any members? No? Okay, thank you. We move to the minute of the meeting held on 29th of January. Firstly, happy to approve as a true record. Any updates for information on the items on the agenda? No? Okay, thank you. Item 4 is the rolling action log. Is there anything that anybody wishes to highlight on the action log?
Convener, I must compliment the fact that there's so many items on the log which have been being cleared up, which is always nice to see. However, could I just ask the very first item, number 377, seems to be a long-standing thing. Have we got any indication as to when, in actual fact, the Scottish Government will proceed with the report so that we can progress this one?
Gary, thank you.
Does it work? It does work. I would say it's a fair question, maybe that's a bad pun. What the government are doing just now is they're finalising a report into the operation of devolved school management schemes across Scotland. I was at a meeting with ADS on Friday in Dundee, and that's one of the main topics of discussion just now. There's a draft paper on that that's out for final tweaks, etc., to all 32 local authorities. After that, they expect that was an integral part of the publication of the guidance on fair funding, and we expect to get the guidance on fair funding, which will include a recommendation around how devolved school management schemes in Scotland before the end of the current academic session. And that means that we'll probably be looking at it over the summer, and a report will come back to the Education Exec, as we promised, early in the next session to look at how we take things forward.
Okay. Content with that? Any other matters in the rolling action log? No? Okay. Oh, right. Okay, sorry. Okay. Did you have a question on the... No, okay, right. Oh. Agenda item 5 is Education Executive Membership. There was a number of vacancies, and Colin, do you want to advise us of where we are?
Yes, thank you, Convener. And as you say, this is a report which deals with 2 vacancies which were on the committee, and presents nominations for the committee to appoint. The first of those related to the primary school staff representative, and the outcome of that process is that John Chalmers of Bonnybridge Primary School is nominated, is unfortunately not able to be with us this morning because he had a pre-arranged event at the school. And in relation to the second parent representative, the Falkirk Area Parent Forum has nominated Meryl Stevenson, who is with us this morning. And the recommendation is to ask the committee to appoint both these representatives.
Okay, welcome, Meryl. Are we content to recommend these appointments?
Convener, it has been mooted in other quarters about the representation possibly by the champions.
Well, I was actually just coming to that,
no, it's a bit premature, but...
No, I was actually going to ask our Chief Governance Officer, because we now cover children's services as a whole within this committee, about how we could perhaps accommodate a looked after care experienced young person within the committee, because I think it would add some value.
Yes, thank you, Convener. There's no reason in principle why there shouldn't be a care experienced young person on the committee. The membership of the committee lies in the hands of the council rather than the committee itself. So the way of achieving and considering that, and I'm happy to do it, would be to take a short report to council for its next meeting, which is at the beginning of May, asking council to consider whether it wishes to add another category to the membership of this committee in the form of a care experienced young person. And if the council were able to agree at the same time, for instance, that be someone nominated by the Champions Board, that would allow time for someone to be nominated in advance of the next meeting of this committee.
Could I also perhaps add that if we could look at the role of our young people and how that could be enhanced to make it somewhat more meaningful than perhaps it has or appears to have been, because I think that would certainly add value to our decision making and would give sort of true collaboration with our young folks and going forward.
I'm happy to have those discussions, Kavir, and perhaps I could do that with Mr. Naylor.
Perhaps the portfolio holder
Indeed.
might want to be involved with that as well. Are members content with that as an extension, consideration for the extension of the committee to go to council? Okay, thank you. The next item is item 6, and it's our Scottish Qualifications Authority attainment in Falkirk. We have a short presentation on that. I don't know whether the Director wants to speak first or whether we have the presentation.
We have a report in front of us that tracks the attainment of Falkirk's young people in the current year. It's school leaver data. It's a very, very positive report indicating the improvements that have taken place over a number of years. Part of the report references some fairly technical details. It talks about virtual comparators, it talks about tariff scores, and we felt it might be helpful if we first of all explain to you what these various measures are before we go through what is a very, very positive good news story about the attainment of Falkirk's young people in the most recent academic session. So Tracy Fox, who's seconded to the authority, is our expert in the arena of what is called insight data, and Tracy is going to take you through a very short presentation just to explain some of these measures and what they mean for the benefit of your consideration when you look at the data.
Morning, everyone. Okay, within the report itself there is quite a lot of reference to SCQF levels. This map here shows the Scottish Qualifications Framework, and essentially within schools this allows you to plan learning and particularly plan progression in learning. So you can see that there are different levels starting at level 1 all the way through up to level 12. Think about the different levels as a kind of depth of learning. The more you get into a subject, the deeper into the subject you get, the higher level you would be working through. Our special schools within the authority will generally, the children will generally be working in and around SCQF levels 1 or 2. That won't be limited to that. We do have examples of children from Carringrange High School last year who did achieve National 5 PE. So they will have achieved at a higher level. Generally speaking, within Carringrange, the kids will be working in and around levels 1 or 2. In our mainstream schools, you can see there highlighted that the vast majority of our young people will be working from SCQF level 3 through to SCQF level 7. And children will enter the framework within the qualifications phase of their schooling, and that starts in S4. You will enter into the framework at a level that's appropriate to you as an individual, and your particular pathway will have been planned based on your prior learning within the broad general education. So we have children who in S4 will sometimes enter into a qualification at level 6. They may have a particular talent or expertise within a subject, and they could be presented for a higher qualification in S4. Generally speaking, our young people within Falkirk will be presented small numbers at National 3, so SEQF level 3, a good number at 4 and a higher number at 5. Some children will work exclusively within a level. All of their learning across a range of subjects will be within a particular level. However, most of our children work between levels depending on the particular subject that they're looking at. So they may be better at some subjects than they are at others. The ones they're better in, they'll be working at a higher SEQF level. We also have some of our schools offering higher national certificates, and also the work that we do with Forth Valley College allows some of our young people to access that. And you can see that the HNC is in line with Advanced Higher. And sometimes these courses are considered to be more appropriate for that young person, for their particular progression and pathway. The HNC might offer a better alternative than the Advanced Higher that will operate within school. We also offer National Progression Awards, and you can see that the National Progression Awards move across the range from SEQF level 2 up to 6, and then there's an overlap with these Professional Development Awards. These awards are ungraded, so the child will either pass these courses or they won't pass. They'll either meet the requirements or they won't. The qualifications, the first list of qualifications from National 5, 6 and 7, those are graded, so you will get a grade A, a grade B or grade C. So although they are equivalent in terms of SEQF level, they are slightly different in that some are examined externally by the SQA, some are examined by SQA, but they are internally assessed within schools. And what schools do is put children on particular pathways that are appropriate to the individual's needs. And we look to build and develop progression through these different levels. And for some children, that will be a very vertical progression. It will be very linear. It will start National 5, SEQF level 5, and it will work its way up through the ranks. For other children, it will be more of a kind of zigzag approach across this map. Now, the other thing that's not highlighted, but now is very much on the radar of our schools, if you look to the end column where it says apprenticeships, and you can see the foundation apprenticeship sitting there, which is equivalent to higher SEQF level 6. That's now becoming much more of an option for our young people, again in working with Forth Valley College, but also in schools developing those programmes as well. It's been an interesting weekend, Brexit aside. Breadth and depth has been in the press quite a bit over the weekend because a number of newspapers have published a league table of schools, children in those schools attaining 5 or more hires, so 5 or more awards at level 6, but specifically those league tables published at the weekend were looking at hires. And this has caused a lot of debate over the weekend. That is only one measure of a school's performance, and it's a narrow measure. And when I look at those tables and I see that 60% of the pupils in a particular school have achieved 5 or more level 6, it doesn't tell me if that's good for that school or if that actually represents underperformance for that school. It also doesn't tell me what the other 40% are doing. And if I was a child in that school, I would be thinking, well, what's the value on what I have achieved? How is that recognised? And as a parent of a child in that school, I would be saying, is that school able to meet the needs of my child who doesn't fit into that category? Is everything happening in that school just aimed at that measure? Or is the school able to meet the needs of my child who doesn't sit at that 5 or more level 6? So breadth and depth of learning and looking at these traditional measures is one thing we would look at, but it wouldn't be the only thing that would tell us about the performance of a school. With Insight, we've started to look at tariff points. And tariff points is where the government assign a number of points related to a qualification on that framework. And I'll show you an example of that on the next slide. And what it does is it then allows you to add up everything that a young people has achieved over the course of their education in school. And that then places a notional numeric value on that attainment collectively. So it captures more than those who are just achieving hires. Our insight data gives us 4 national dashboard measures, and we have focused on those within the report. So we look at literacy and numeracy. There is a link between how children perform in literacy and numeracy and their positive destinations. And so that is a crucial measure for us. Leavers destinations, after 4th year, 5th year, 6th year, whenever a child leaves school, where do they end up? And that's representing all of their education, which may have started at age 3. So where, at the end of their formal schooling, where are they? Are they in employment, further higher education? Improving attainment for all is about looking at those who are high achievers, but also those who are less able. How are we supporting those children, and are we improving their attainment? And then we look at the deprivation factor, which is about how we close the gap. Are children who come from our most deprived areas doing as well as those from the most affluent areas or the least deprived areas? And again, looking across all of these measures, and it's taking into account performance across them all, that gives us a much fuller and rounder picture of how education is performing. So these are the tariff points, and I'll just highlight a few things. So if a young person achieved an SEQF level 4, so that in most of our schools would be a National 4 course award, 33 points would be assigned to that qualification for the purpose of us using tariff points. A pass at National 5, you can see, increases to 64. And then we're up to 160 for a pass at higher. Huge jump. So this is about depth of learning. And it's also, there's a relationship between the amount of time you need to put into your learning to reach this level. So there is an aspect of difficulty, of course, but it's also about that depth. If you consider an SEQF level 7, a child achieving an A grade, say in advanced higher art, they would score 480 tariff points. Another child may well have 15 National 4 qualifications, and if we multiply the 15 by the 33, they would have 495 points. So you can see that the points themselves can represent, when they're totaled together for a young person, can represent 2 very different types of learner. Now, it would be extreme to say that a child would come into school and only leave a high school with advanced higher art. So that is an extreme example. But those 480 points represent something quite different from a young person who has demonstrated their ability across a whole range of subjects. And the destinations for these young people are also likely to be different. So the tariff scores do allow us to look at that broad range. We would never look at an individual's tariff score. We look at it in relation to groups of young people. So how are the average of our lowest attainers? How are they performing? How are the children in SIMD1, living in SIMD1? What's their average score look like? And that then allows us to look at trends and patterns through time. So although you've got to work on an individual basis to create the scores originally, you would never use a raw score of one pupil to relate to another. It's by grouping it together that you get a feel for the pattern. Tariff also works on this notion of latest and best. So this perhaps represents the results of quite a high achieving young person. And you can see that in 4th year, they've achieved a range of National 5 passes at different grades. They've then gone on in 5th year, and because they've now moved on to higher and achieved a higher, any points that were attributed to the National 5 award, they now go, they disappear. And that's so that we work within a system where we're presenting children at the right level at that point in time, and we don't feel that you need to start at National 4 and then do 5 and then do higher. So we try and get kids in at the right point. Because this child went on to do advanced higher English, the higher then gets knocked off when we look at how to build and develop the score. And so you can see that happening. PE, the person doesn't do in S5, but they do pick it up again in S6. And so if I was looking and building this model, you could see that this child, at the point of exit from school, had 1,564 tariff points, which is made up of a mixture of different qualifications. So it's not counting that they've got 3 hires or 5 hires. It's a kind of totality of all of their learning. The virtual comparator is something that's new within Insight, and one that initially we did find difficult to get our head around, and that's because traditionally we had comparator schools. But there was recognition through time that although you had a comparator school, that school was never exactly like your school. There are no two schools that are exactly alike. The demographic of the school is different, the size of the school is different, your cohort, whether you're urban or rural, all of these things have an impact on your curriculum, the design of your school, the makeup of your school. And so the virtual comparator was developed to look at the characteristics of the young people within the school, not the school as a whole, but the characteristics of the young people. And when we look at the virtual comparator, the question we're asking ourselves is, if this young person with these characteristics was somewhere else, would they be doing better, or would they do the same, or would they do less well? Now, the characteristics that we look at are the ones that are considered statistically to have an influence on your attainment. So gender does play a part. Whether you're a boy or a girl does generally, statistically, when you look at large numbers, have an impact on your attainment. The level of deprivation, so if you come from an area of significant deprivation, that does have an impact on your overall attainment. We're working hard to make that not the case, but statistically that is still there. The stage of leaving, if you leave at the end of S4, you will have fewer qualifications than if you leave at S5 or S6. So we need to factor that in, the point at which a young person is leaving school. And then we need to factor in whether a child has additional support needs. And really there are 3 categories of this. The child might have no additional support need. They may have additional support needs, but they are able to access their mainstream classes for 80% of the time. So they have support, but generally speaking, in school they're able to access almost all of their mainstream classes. But then we have some young children with more complex needs, and they will require extraction from some of those classes to get specific support that addresses their need. What we do with the virtual comparator is we match one of our pupils to 10 from other authorities. And that starts to build a statistical model that we can be reliant on. So we're not just matching 1 to 1, we're matching 1 to 10. And we build the model. So if we have 10 pupils who are boys living in SIMD2, leaving school at the end of 4th year with no additional support needs, if we had 2 of those pupils or 4 of those pupils, that would be multiplied by 10 for us to draw a comparison. And this is my last slide. And again, this kind of comes back to the point of the weekend. Our data isn't for the purpose of data. We genuinely want to interrogate the data to identify things that we're doing well, that we consistently do well in, and areas that require improvement. And it is trends and patterns that we're interested in. Sometimes you do see a difference from one year to the other, and that is significant, but it's often a pattern over time that gives us a bigger picture. It's using the measures together. That very narrow lens of putting schools in a league table that have achieved 5 or more hires is a very narrow lens of how to look at the performance of a school. So using the measures, looking at literacy and numeracy and how it relates to positive destinations is crucial. and to use the measures in context. Being above an authority average within a school, secondary school in Falkirk, if it's above the authority average, then that is actually where we would expect it to be, and we might expect it to be even better than that. One that's sitting below the authority average might still be performing well in the context of that school. So all our schools are different, we recognise that, and it's to view the measures that we use in the context, of that bigger picture. And that's me.
Thank you, Tracy. I think that's maybe set the scene for the report. I'll just ask the Director, or is it David, you're going to give us the overview of the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Tracy, and hopefully that's been of some help to everyone. The report today is looking at the exit data for our children and young people in 4th, 5th and 6th year when they leave our schools, and as Tracy has explained, they have a range of qualifications. The report itself is laid out. Section 2.1 has a number of recommendations for members to consider. The background, I think, was covered fairly succinctly by Tracy in terms of the rationale behind this particular report and how we within Falkirk are using the insight data to support and challenge ourselves to do better and ensure that our children and young people get the best possible learning experience. The range of measures that are reported in 3.3 link into the priorities within the corporate plan, and we've translated those into 3.4, which is the Education Division key priorities, which you'll be familiar with. We've reported on these previous years in terms of raising attainment for every child, closing the poverty-related attainment gap, and improving the positive destinations for our children and young people. Section 4, the considerations, 4.1 and 4.2 was really covered by Tracy's presentation in terms of actually an explanation of what the virtual comparator was and the various measures that contained there within. The first kind of key measure that we were looking at today is the school leaver destinations data. And 4.3 makes reference to the number of children and young people that have left our schools in the past year, just over 1,500, and those are broken down to 136 at S4, 415 at S5 and 992 at S6. And that data then is placed in a chart for us to look at the percentages of those young people entering a positive destination, and this year it's 95%, which is in line with our virtual comparator, ahead of the Regional Improvement Collaborative and ahead of the Scottish average, and again is also equal first in terms of actually our previous best, which was in 2015-16, and I really think that's testament to the work that's happening within our schools to ensure that our children and young people are supported in terms of decision making at the point of exit from schools to ensure that almost all go into a positive destination. Section 4.8 moves on to then look at some of the attainment data, and the first section is looking at literacy. The raising attainment and literacy is a key priority for our schools, and improved literacy in turn allows our young people to access a broader range of opportunities when they move beyond our schools, and also facilitates their ability to access other areas of the curriculum. The graphs below show the attainment trend in literacy at level 4 and level 5. And again, as Tracy indicated, in our schools, that's broadly National 4 and National 5 qualifications our children and young people would be engaged with. Literacy at level 4 has improved over the 5 years previously and is now above the virtual comparator, the Regional Improvement Collaborative and the national average. And similarly, the level 5 performance has followed a similar trend. And again, the data sitting at 97%, and it's our best to date for the level 4 data, and 86% for our level 5. Tracy and the team have done a bit more digging, and 4.10 looks at the fact that 98% of our children in S6 leaving school have achieved level 5 or better, which again is our aim is to ensure that all of our children and young people are literate and numerate at the point of exit from our schools. And what this has allowed us to do is now be ranked 5th overall nationally for level 4 and level 5, and places us in the top quartile. And again, we're really delighted in terms of actually that's the efforts and endeavours of the children and young people, their families and the staff in schools over the past years. The next section looks at the attainment in numeracy, And again, I'm happy to report that that's again an improving picture. I think numeracy is particularly challenging for all schools across Scotland in terms of parental perceptions of that. I think the schools and the service have been working very hard to shift the perception of maths and numeracy and ensuring that it's seen as accessible to all. The chart again looks at level 4 and level 5. And again, it's clearly indicating that we're ahead of our virtual comparator, the Regional Improvement Collaborative, and the RIC average over the period of time. And again, we've seen a 7% increase at level 4 and a 17% increase in level 5 since 2014-15. And again, is our best to date performance. And again, for level 5, it's up to 77%. We've got a year-on-year improvement over the last 5 years. Again, is demonstrating the fact that our children are engaging positively with their experiences in numeracy. And this places us also 5th nationally, and again in the top quartile. We have benefited over the past number of years for a dedicated numeracy officer, and the team particularly focusing on aspects of numeracy and mathematics across all of our schools, from nursery, primary and secondary, to ensure that our children and young people are getting the best possible opportunities at these particular levels. And again, I think the data discussed there reflects the impact that that's now having, and hopefully our schools will grow from strength to strength. The next section is looking at the poverty-related attainment gap. And again, it looks across the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivations from decile 1 to decile 10. The chart, now if you're looking at the charts in grey, as I am, it's extremely difficult. If you're fortunate enough to have a computer screen there, Falkirk is highlighted in the blue, and the National is in the kind of red tone. On the graph, most of the bulbs, little blue bulbs, are rising above, they're floating above the national trend, and particularly SIMD 1, 2 and 3 have shown greater improvements. All our children at the lowest end and the top end have shown an improvement over the past number of years, and what we're now seeing is an improvement for all agenda, but a levelling of that graph, which means we're beginning to close the poverty-related attainment gap. And again, I'm happy to report that particularly at SIMD1 there's been a significant improvement since 2014. Back then the average was about 436 tariff points compared to the current data, which is 756, which represents 320 tariff point improvement. So for that cohort, that means that on average they're all achieving 5 more passes at National 5, which is a significant shift in attainment for that particular cohort. But equally, when you look at the top end, decile 10, that particular cohort has shown an increase of 226 points, and that represents an increase of an additional higher and National 5 per pupil at that particular end. So it's an improving trend overall, and again, I'm particularly pleased to see that our SIMD 1, 2 and 3 pupils are performing at a higher rate, and the schools again are focusing on that cohort to make sure that they have greatest benefit from the Pupil Equity Fund that's been provided to them over the last couple of years. And again, it's testament also to the work that's going on in the schools themselves, from the parents and the pupils, but also the staff members and the school leadership in terms of actually the tracking and monitoring that's going on. We're confident as a team at the centre that our schools are robustly tracking all of our children and young people and actually asking questions of the performance of one another within schools and across schools to ensure that we've got an improving agenda, and that will continue to be so for the coming years. The next section looks to improvement for all. This looks at the lowest performing 20%, the mid-performing 60% and the top performing 20%. And however we do that, we'll always have those 3 categories. And our challenge is to make sure that the difference between the lowest and highest performing is reducing over time. So the first graph is looking at the lowest attaining 20%, and it's evident that we are performing at a greater level than we've done in previous years. Our performance is above the virtual comparator, ahead of the RIC and national average, and this has allowed us to be ranked 6th nationally, and again it's 220 tariff points in terms of actually compared to back in 2013 it was 128, so it's our best to date. The next is looking at our middle 60 performance. And again, we're very keen within Falkirk that we look at all of our children and young people and how they're performing. And the middle is a strong group here. Again, we've got an improving trend over the last number of years. we've improved. The virtual comparator is now, we're slightly ahead of that, ahead of the RIC and the national average, and again that places us 5th nationally in terms of this particular measure. The final measure for this section is looking at the top performing 20%, and again it's our highest figure to date. It's shown that we are again outperforming the virtual comparator. The Regional Improvement Collaborative is just slightly ahead of us, and again the challenge for ourselves is actually our data contributes to the RIC, so we're feeding into that higher performance of the Regional Improvement Collaborative. So as we do better, the RIC does better, so we're competing against ourselves somewhat there, but again we're really pleased with that particular set of data, and it's ranked as 7th overall in relation to this particular measure. The last set of data is looking at the attainment higher, and the first set is looking at kind of one higher, and this data is actually showing us again an improving trend. We've had a 6% increase since last year. We are tied with the virtual comparator, ahead of the Regional Improvement Collaborative and ahead of Scotland. The next chart's looking at the 3 or more, and again we've had an improving picture here. We've improved 4% since last year. We're just marginally behind the virtual comparator. We're ahead of the Regional Improvement Collaborative and ahead of the Scottish average. And the final measure is looking at the 5 or more that Tracy made reference to. And again, we've seen an increase with 3% since last year in this particular measure. And we're just narrowly behind the virtual comparator, in line with the Regional Improvement Collaborative and just ahead of the national average. And I've said earlier that the improvement of performance across these range of factors has been down to the work including developments in tracking and monitoring, changes in curriculum structures in their schools that allow people progress in different pathways, and Tracy made reference to that in the work in terms of actually being able to navigate your way through various levels and opportunities for children and young people to either have a very broad experience over a wide range of subjects, or if they're particularly motivated in a particular subject area, they can go on and progress to a much higher level. And again, our schools are working very, very closely with those individuals to ensure that their pathway suits them as an individual and their aspirations beyond school as well. The figures at the higher figures as well, again, don't necessarily capture the work that we're doing in terms of HNCs and foundation apprenticeships, what have got equivalent tariff point value, but the previous indicators that we've gone through today captures that, and again that's allowed us to have such a positive picture within the Falkirk schools. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, David. It's good to get such a positive, good news report, and I won't steal the portfolio holder's thunder in that one, and I'll just ask her to speak to the report.
Hugely happy to move this report. It is a good news story. These are the highest results, as it's already been said, in the last 10 years, and our young people of Falkirk have definitely made us proud and should be celebrated. Well done to all our young folk for all the hard work they've done, and thank you to the hard-working staff teams right across our district and to the Centre for the support that they give. Audit Scotland has reported that Falkirk Council's attainment has improved by 34% since 2011-12, and it is now, as David's already said, in the top quartile in attainment, whereas in 2011 and 12 we're in the bottom. So we've seen a massive improvement over the last few years, which is excellent. Draw your attention to page 26, that little chart with the funny bubbles, it highlights, although we are still improving at our highest rate, the fact that there has been a greater improvement in decile 1, 2 and 3 is excellent, and it proves that the work that we're putting in is actually closing that attainment gap. So the things that we're putting in place over the last few years are working and are improving. It shows that the efforts in closing the attainment gap, and with the money going directly into the schools, I definitely think that has an effect. The fact that head teachers and the staff teams are being allowed now to look at their curriculum and to shape their curriculum in a way to help their children in particular is an excellent move forward. And I think that's part of why we're seeing these good results this year. There's more young people reaching their potential than ever before, and that has definitely needs to be celebrated in Falkirk. And saying all that, there is still a lot of work to be done, so we're moving forward and we're getting on with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madana. I think that there should be some credit given to yourself in the work that you've put in over the last couple of years in pushing this agenda forward. I think we are in a great place for our young people. I'm pleased that it's not purely focused on just academic outcomes, but it's a whole rounded approach in looking at the positive destinations and the investment that's been put in by government initiatives or policy initiatives at particularly focusing around the bottom 3 or 4 deciles. We've seen a shift in that direction, but it's pleasing that there's seen a shift right across. So I think that you should take some credit for the work that you've put in and working with the service. And as you've said, that we shouldn't be complacent. We should continue to push the boundaries for our young people and continue to them to achieve. Councillor Alexander.
Convener, I enjoyed the presentation. It used to be that the saying within Falkirk Council was points make houses. Now they make qualifications, so that's progress. I'm just wondering how much my work grades are worth these days, though. But maybe find out later. I'd like to associate myself with the comments of both yourself and Councillor McHugh. It's been a difficult year. We've had a lot of headlines which have thankfully proved to be not accurate in terms of the quality of education and in terms of the funding for education. And I'm grateful to Councillor McHugh for all the work she's done in protecting the budgets for education, and also for dealing with what's been sometimes a very, very difficult time. She's done it with great strength and dignity that's come across to the staff. It'd be wrong for me not to thank the pupils themselves, the teachers, the learning staff, the support that they received from the Education Authority themselves, the whole team working together. And it's the teamwork that tends to bring the results upwards. And while league tables are not the ideal outcome of the exam process or the attainment process, we have to recognise that we do have to measure the progress, and a 34% increase in the educational attainment over a short period of time is something to celebrate. I think it's fair to say it'd be churlish not to recognise the role of previous administrations, and I would like to do that. But I'm sure they'll appreciate what I'm about to say in terms of the modern education authority that we have at the moment, and who the father of that was. And it was the late Provost Tom Coleman, who I remember took the education authority apart and put it back together again, in a way that I think laid the ground rules for the steady increase that we've seen. Because if we had a massive jump in any one year, then it should be treated with suspicion. But what we've seen is gradual progress, because we took at that time the view that the longer term educational needs were greater than the short term needs for league tables, for the league tables in particular that were relevant at that time. So I think that there's one or two still around the table from that era, and I'm sure that they'll agree with me that Tom Coleman played a major role in setting up the education authority that we have now. And again, as I say, I think previous administrations as well have continued that trend, and that's again shows what can be achieved when there's joint working. When we're all on the same agenda, and when we are looking for the best for our pupils. Finally, the Scottish Government, I think, are due some credit here as well. The PEF money has been seen to be effective, and we hope that the measurement of the progress that's been made will continue. continue in an upward spiral. I think that the government takes a bit of stick from us all. Sometimes they deserve it, but I think in this case, what we've seen in terms of education being the priority of the government, we've seen the results for the money they've invested. So all in all, convener, this is a tremendously encouraging report, and I think it gives us reassurance that the Education Authority is on the right road, schools are on the right road, government's on the right road, and this committee's on the right road. So it's not often we get the opportunity to bring all these agencies together and give them all credit at the same time. But I think we'll be having this at this particular occasion.
Okay, thank you. Any other member? Councillor Nimmo?
Yep, thanks, convener. I agree totally with the comments that have been made so far. This is a good news story. There has been steady progress over the last 12 years. And just to highlight part of the paper this morning, the SIMD figures, I think they're fantastic. That's a great result. To end up 4th or 5th in Scotland, hopefully we can go higher in future years and take that forward. I have 2 or 3 questions, convener. We've had discussions at this committee before regarding the virtual comparators. At the time, nobody seemed to know how these were made up, why they were made up. I think even Education Scotland weren't too sure how they arrived at the figures. It was good to see the slides this morning as well, because that went a long way to try and explain the issue regarding the comparators. But how accurate are they, bearing in mind that we've now got the tariff scores as well? Are we secure in our mind that they're accurate enough for our purposes?
Thanks, Councillor. I would say yes. We're now quite clear in terms of how the virtual comparators are compiled in terms of actually the range. It gives us, although Tracy talked about the kind of 1 in 10 sample, what happens actually is the sample hundreds, each one of our kids is mapped against 100 other pupils nationally, and then that sample is randomised to take 10 from it. So again, in terms of actually a statistical measure, we think we're quite comfortable it's a reasonable measure of the progress of a young person to do that. And as Tracy said, we don't look at it as an individual child level, we look at it as a cohort in terms of actually when we're making assumptions and assessments. What we would do at an individual pupil level is actually look at their particular profile of subjects and progression pathway that's been agreed with them in conjunction with the support staff in the school, pastoral staff and their family and carers. So we're quite comfortable understanding now quite clearly what the virtual comparator is. Our schools are working hard in terms of ensuring that our children and young people are getting the best possible opportunity, and I think this report then demonstrates the fact that the schools are actually now going beyond that which the virtual comparator is indicating, and I think that's a strong position for our schools to be in.
Okay, thanks for that. Next question is in relation to the attainment money that goes direct to the head teachers. How does that factor into these tariff scores? Or does it?
It will. Currently, the data that's in front of you relates to learning that took place before the Pupil Equity Fund. Pupil Equity Fund is awarded to primary schools and to pupils in S1, 2 and 3. This attainment relates to 4, 5 and 6 in 2017-18. So what will happen in terms of pupil equity funding is we expect that the impact of that will go even further to close the poverty-related attainment gap, will go even further to raise the profile of attainment in deciles 1, 2 and 3. But the system takes a while for that money to wash through and impact on all learners. So by the time we get to 2020-21, the kids that are sitting exams will all have had the benefit of pupil equity funding.
Maybe I just didn't word my question right, Robert. My point really was, how is this going to be measured by the head teachers? How is the additional attainment element going to be measured, and how will it be factored into the tariff scores?
The various projects that are running in our schools, the schools are using improvement methodology, so they're tracking very carefully the activity that they're engaging in, and they're looking to try and measure the impact live, so to speak, in terms of actually informing their judgment and practice, in terms of actually, is this investment having a positive impact on the learning experience of that individual child or group of children. So again, the schools are collecting that data at the moment. As Robert said, that's coming through in terms of the teacher judgments, in terms of the level of attainment within primary and S1 to 3 at this stage. What we will be doing is obviously then looking at the data that then subsequently comes to then see whether there's a correlation between the data that's coming from the schools from primary and S1 to 3 in broad general education. Is that then translating into a further improvement into our senior phase pupils in terms of the tariff scores? So that's an emerging picture in very early stages, and I would hope that will begin to be realised over the coming years, and we'll be watching that very carefully.
Thanks for that. Convener, last question. League tables were mentioned in the presentation as well. Is it Falkirk Council's intention to publish league tables for each high school?
Absolutely not.
Glad to hear it.
How many exclamation marks were at the back of that statement?
Can I formally second the report? I forgot to do it.
Yes, I agree with what's been said about the positivity of the report. I think I'll go back as far as Councillor Alexander in terms of ex-Provost Coleman. He certainly did shake up things in education. In 95-96, when we became the Education Authority, we inherited not just bad buildings, as Gary will know, but I think a certain degree of self-satisfaction, which within a short while Councillor Coleman dealt with quite in his inimitable way, shall we say. And I think this committee has generally been unanimous in most decisions that have been made, which again is a big factor. Yeah. League tables, well, I'm a Falkirk supporter, so I'll say no more than that. Yeah. But it does bring into question the basis on which these statistics are arrived at. The schools who were top of the said league tables, I know personally because I have a relative who lives in the west end of Glasgow, that several pupils have tutors, several pupils have parents who are both highly qualified themselves. So they're not measuring like for like at all. It also, I believe, doesn't take into account whether you get your hire in 1 year or 2 years, which used to be a big difference locally, without mentioning names. So I kind of share Mark Twain's opinion of statistics. One question that kind of bothers me a bit is what appears to be the assumption that everybody living in Decile 1, for example, is not aspirational or does not have aspirational parents. I think many of us sitting around the table probably would have been in decile number, in fact, -1 when we grew up, but we were lucky to have aspirational parents. So again, the statistics bring in doubt as to whether measurement by the deciles is in fact too accurate. But having voiced these little doubts, I move on to positive destinations. It's very much a snapshot. What we don't know is the people going to uni, how many leave in the first year, second year, how many apprentices, in fact, end up getting full-time jobs. Are there stats available for what happens after the immediate positive destination?
Thanks, Councillor. Those stats aren't readily available, but we have asked those questions of Forth Valley College, and we're looking to see how can we gather data from the universities on Falkirk young people who progress to university to actually understand how well equipped they are for that particular learning pathway, and what the staying on rate is and completion rate as well, because I think you make a very valid point in terms of actually that's crucial to make sure that when we are mapping a young person onto a college course or a university course, it's actually the right thing for them, and they've actually got every chance to sustain that through to completion. And again, we are looking at that. We've got anecdotal information from our schools. Again, the young people would keep in contact with specific teachers or members of staff in schools. But in terms of the collective, we're finding that quite challenging to get a definitive picture. But we're going to continue to work on it to hopefully allow us to have a greater insight into the long-term journey for our children and young people.
I would imagine, for example, that in the leafy suburbs of Glasgow, top of the league table, several of the people who go to university, in fact, drop out because they then become exposed to sitting in a room with 250 other people, no tutors. It'd be interesting to see those details as well. But thanks to everyone concerned, especially the teachers.
I think I just want to again thank for the presentation was very informative, and I think that many of the aspects which were picked up in that, but particularly in the planning for each child, that although we are looking at the statistics which come out for what represents the overall grouping, that the experience of our young children within our education system is very much tailored to them, and not just on a, as was explained, you're a higher student or you're an advanced higher student, but that you may have a very great variation in interest and want to do different levels in these subjects. I think that's not widely understood, perhaps even by the parent body or the general public, but it's important that we don't look at measures of league tables in that sense across the board, or indeed that 5 higher gold standard idea, which is not really the case. I think the positive destination is always an interesting one. Having left school at 5th year and gone straight to 2nd year at university, I was probably in that, you shall go and do this, and did indeed drop out of my university course. But in that sense, there wasn't that focus back then on what the long-term planning. It was a case of you can achieve this is going to get you the maximum, and that journey, that individualisation and long-term planning perhaps was a failing back then. Ultimately, I'm not sure whether it's a positive destination to be sitting as a counsellor around the education executive table. Jury's maybe still out on that, I don't know. I'd like to think that it was. But yeah, maybe. But I think that the general message that I take, certainly as a parent as well with children at school, is that the planning and the understanding of our children's journeys and the commitment that our staff have to looking at how they can get the best for that child across the whole range for their entire future is really, really welcomed, and something that needs to be emphasised beyond the great story that it is that we have these improving statistics. So very much thank staff for highlighting that and bringing that out in the presentation, and that we have that opportunity to acknowledge it for our staff and for our students.
Any other member? Okay, we can say thank you to the service, well done. However, don't rest on your laurels. We need to keep pushing the aspirations of all our young children to achieve the best they can be, and I think that would be the message we would want you to take back. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 7, intermenstrual music tuition fees. Colin, could I just ask for clarification, because this is an item that is related to the budget, and that would normally be under a 6-month rule. I'm just looking for some clarification about whether we can discuss this item today.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I think that's a helpful question to raise, and maybe for the benefit of the members of the committee, just to explain the issue here, is that the Council set a series of fees and charges at its budget meeting towards the end of February, and this report raises a suggested change to one of the decisions that was made at that budget meeting. And the Council, in its standing orders, has a rule which generally prevents reconsidering decisions within 6 months, maybe a bit reminiscent of some of the discussions that have been going on in the House of Commons around Brexit at the moment. But perhaps more wisely than the standing orders of the House of Commons, our standing orders also have opportunities for reconsidering in certain circumstances. And one of those circumstances that I think may be relevant for the case here is where there's been a material change in circumstances since the decision has been made, and that's a decision for the convener of the committee to make rather than one for the committee. And in my view, the material circumstance which could be considered here is that you'll find reference in the report to the fact that COSLA guidance was issued, and as I understand it, it's almost issued simultaneously, almost to the day that the Council was taking its decision in relation to the fees and charges. So I think that's, in my opinion anyway, it would certainly be open to the convener to rule that that's a material change, because that guidance has now come to the attention of you as a committee and it wasn't available to the Council at the time it took its decision at the budget meeting.
Okay, thank you, Colin. I would agree that there has been a material change. Information has now become available that we didn't know at the time of the budget setting. Had we had that information at the time, we would have made or taken a view, as I am going to suggest we now do, and I believe that we should discuss this item going forward. Gary?
Thanks very much, Chair. As I mentioned earlier on, the purpose of this report is set out in section 1. It does emanate from the guidance that COSLA issued, and it was issued virtually the day before the budget was set. The 3 recommendations before Education Executive today, I'll come back to them at the end of the report, they're outlined in section 2. Section 3 outlines the background to it, and as was mentioned earlier on by my colleagues, that it follows the co-produced guidance paper that COSLA issued, and it was co-produced by COSLA, the Scottish Government and the Music Education Partnership Group. The guidance paper itself is produced as attached as Appendix 1 in full to the report. As also mentioned in section 3.3, we did point out in the report that the paper was issued just at the same time as Falkirk set their budget. Sections 3.4, 3.5 and 3.6 look at the current level of charges in which are applied across the Falkirk area for music instrument tuition. There are full charge and a concessionary charge. The concessionary charge, as we had up until now, covers all pupils who qualify for free school meals. Section 3.5 also shows that as part of our alignment to the poverty strategy, we chose as part of the budget decision to reduce the concessionary charge from £60.45 last year down to £50, and that was in alignment with part of the work we did around the poverty strategy when the Council overall reviewed all of its fees and charges. And just to make the point in 3.6 that no charges are made to any S4 to S6 pupils who are studying for their SQE music exams. Section 4 looks at the considerations. The key considerations are, as part of the guidance, is that as a minimum there should be no charging for students who are entitled to free school meals and for students who are studying for SQA qualifications. The guidance also produces, as outlined in section 4.2, some information regarding the improvement service survey of concessions and exemption practice throughout Scotland. They are summarised on page 4 of the guidance note itself. The proposed way forward for consideration this morning is outlined in section 4.3. In view of the COSLA guidance, that we are proposing this morning that from 1st of April 2019 no charges were made to those pupils who are entitled to free school meals. And the second part of the proposal is that recognising the further guidance that around concessionary charges that the Improvement Service have produced within the guidance, as the officers will review the wider issues on the concessions raised by them, and will take account, as Mr Moody said, of the budget decision that was made in terms of fees and charges, and we will review that in light of the Improvement Service guidance. I think that's both pragmatic, and I think it's the right thing to do in this particular case. Section 4.4 summarises that the estimated cost, if we chose to do that this morning, would be about £6,000 per annum. Section 5 summarises the consultation. There was no consultation taking place in terms of the COSLA guidance. There will, however, be consultation should the proposal be agreed today in terms of how we consider the further guidance and concessionary charges as outlined by the findings of the Improvement Service. Section 6 summarises the financial position. We said £5,000. It also confirms the legal inequalities position. This is linked with the Standards in Schools Scotland Act of 2000, and part of that requires councils to consider how to reduce inequalities. In terms of aligning that to our poverty strategy, it does align, and we feel that the actions today are aligned to the COSLA paper, support the Council's poverty strategy. Section 6.5, it's only right to say that there are potential reputational risks should we not agree with this morning, and that Falkirk would potentially be out of alignment with the issue, the guidance that was issued by COSLA. In conclusion, in Section 7, Children's Services certainly support this recommendation of COSLA, and probably the issue has been boiling around for a number of years now around the charging for music tuition, and indeed we welcome that by implementing the guidance, if we choose to do so, it would bring consistency of approach to this area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McHugh.
Happy to move this report. Just to reiterate what Gary was saying there, if we had known this information prior to our budget presentation, then we would have implemented it back then, but happy that this report's now going forward and we can implement it as soon as it's agreed, and hopefully it's agreed this morning.
Thank you. Any other member, any questions? Councillor Reid.
Yes, following the cuts in tuition in the budget, are there any individual pupils receiving individual tuition in S1 to 3?
I would have to actually look into that. I'm not aware of that, but I'll confirm that to you and get back to you as soon as I possibly can.
Because I understood the cut meant the end of individual tuition, apart from those taking the higher. It's interesting to find out if that was the case.
Okay. Are we happy to agree the report? Okay, thank you. Okay, move on to early learning and childcare 2020 expansion. This has become a standing item, I think, on our agenda. But again, it's another good news story. Gary? Oh, sorry.
I hope it is, Chairman. Thanks very much for that. By way of introduction, we've highlighted in the past that the introduction of 1140 has brought with it a number of challenges. One of the challenges is the provision of school meals. Some of our young people, children, are going to be in earlier settings for up to 10 hours a day under the new requirement. It's important that we get the meal provision right. I'm very pleased to say that the two young ladies at the top, both Gemma and Ashley, are from Bowhouse and Nether Mains. Gemma and Ashley are two of our recently intake of graduates. So when we got the additional 8 graduates, Gemma and Ashley are testimony to the fact that we've recruited them. They're working in these areas. Many of you know that our standalone early years provision have always provided meals for our children. However, within our schools, there are different challenges that are being raised around how we deliver the meals. And I'm very pleased to say that both Gemma and Ashley, with the schools and also with the help of our catering services, have looked at the challenges face on, and they've challenged the system. And I think that's an important thing here. The system will not be perfect, and it's important that we get people to challenge the system and stand up to say, look, can we make it better? So I'm very pleased to say that they've done this under their own initiative. They've presented the presentation to the Children's Services Senior Leadership Team. We were so impressed by it, we thought it's only right that we share the presentation with you today before we talk about the content of the paper this morning. Thank you.
Perfect. Right. Move it. I'll stand there. So in the beginning, in August 2018, we began our 1140 journey. So I'm based at Nether Mains, and it's important to mention that we were an early adopter. So we actually participated in the 1140 introduction last academic year, which would have been 2017-18. And our lunch provision was only very small and intimate in numbers because our intake of children was less than half in what we have just now. So we'd split it over a week. So we didn't have any more than 15 children at one time in for lunch, and we were commended by the Care Inspectorate and given a 6 for excellent for quality care and support. And one of the feedback that the inspector had actually mentioned was how nurturing our lunch approach was. So when we then went in to deliver 1140 in August 2018, the only option that we had initially was to provide lunch for 40 plus children, the same as Bowhouse, along in our school dining hall, because we didn't have the capacity to do that in our nursery establishment. It was too small. But it quickly became apparent and evident to myself and Gemma that actually this wasn't the approach that we wanted for our children. A lot of them were very upset, crying at the table. There was very loud noise, basketballs hitting off the shutters because the other school children were playing. So it just wasn't a nurturing experience at all for them.
So in September, we decided to do a wee trial and move a small number of our children to ELC for lunch. And I mean, our results straight away were instant. We saw an increase of children's eating, going up. They were settled at the table. They weren't being nurtured by staff because they had time. They were in their own environment. And by the end of September 2018, we moved all children within our settings to having lunch here within our nursery. And I mean, even the comparison between those photos, so the ones in the hall to those ones there, tell their own story. So we've got wee people who come to us who are aged 3 but are staged about 1.5 to 2. So they're still very young. So for us to meet their individual needs, it's really important that they're in a safe and secure environment with adults that they're comfortable with, instead of a big strange school hall that's got PE going on next door. There's a bell ringing that I've really never heard before. And we've got a few bits and pieces of data to show you just to see how that's increased children's eating.
So this is just a small example. We've been using the methodology approach, and we've been observing children over each day to measure their food intake and the amount of food wastage that's been going on. But this is just an overview. So we were having daily about between 25 and 30% of our children were actually upset and crying in the dining hall because it was so overwhelming for them. And you'll see that was in the start of September, and when we moved, we reviewed it again in August, and immediately the orange line dropped down to 0. So the first day that we moved back, there was 1 or 2 children that were still a wee bit upset, but the results were absolutely instant, and it just highlighted to us the importance of the environment again for our young children, and how if they're secure in their environment, their well-being needs will be met. So that was quite instant, that the results there. And when we've been presenting that, a lot of people are commenting on how visual it is to them, that actually between 25 and 30% are crying when they're along in the hall, but then we move it back and it's virtually down to 0.
So at Bowhouse, what we've done is, the second graph shows you the percentage of children who were eating lunch in the dining hall, and you can see it's very sporadic. Some days there was only 17%, other days it shot up to above 90%, and when we moved to ELC, you can see that actually it becomes quite consistent, and that we reviewed this in October, that actually above 60% or more of children were eating every single day. And that demonstrated to us that just that one move, so that one changing factor to move to ELC was huge for children. So we saw a reduction in food waste, an increase in children eating and them being settled. So again, their well-being was being met. And it just made for a happier ELC setting as well. You can see here that over the past few months, it's developed considerably. So in the very beginning, we were sitting with our key groups, so that children were going in smaller numbers. So our key groups were sitting about 8. So we had 2 groups at any one time, and they came with their key workers. So they had an adult who was role modelling, who was eating with them, because some of our wee people don't have that, and that's the reality for us within our settings. However, we moved it forward, and our wee people now self-serve at lunch, so they can choose what they want. You'll find on some days they just want a plate of mince, and that's fine. Or they want it all, and again, that's fine. But a key thing for us was that actually, as long as they're eating something, and we're building capacity for children to make choices, that was really important for us. We do Big Chef, Little Chef, so Ashley does that in Nethermains with families. In Bow House, our children are involved in prepping their meals as well, so they might make the salad, they might help prepare that for the fish and chips that we're having that day, or they might make the soup in nursery, and we actually find that when they make their own things, again, percentage of children eating increases, because they've made it, they know what's went into it.
Just to elaborate a bit on the Big Chef, Little Chef, this is an initiative that we've been doing at Nethermains, where we've had a block of family cooking, and the parents are invited in to prepare meals, so it's building capacity, as Jem was saying, and it's upskilling some of our parents who maybe don't have the confidence in preparing the meals. The school and the nursery pay for the food that we're making, so as well the families are getting to take home a meal that's serving sometimes a full family, and they're reporting back that they're using the recipes at home as well, so that's been really positive for us and our families. We've also involved siblings from the school. They've asked if older siblings could come and join in, and that's been positive as well. So, as Jem has mentioned there, a lot of our children have been involved in making their own meals, which gives them a positive association with food straight away at an early age. And actually, through obviously being given the real life experiences and the role model of the adults, we've noticed a massive increase in our children's independence skills also. They're really confident, they're using knives, they're cutting, they're feeding themselves. And when that was along in the hall, that just wasn't happening, because when there's 40 children sitting on a bench and they're all needing help to cut, the adults find that really difficult to role model. It's not the right environment to do that. So we've noticed a massive increase and improvement in our children's social skills and independence skills.
So when we were looking at this approach, one of the factors was to ensure that we had nurturing and home-like environments. So, for example, we've done lots of work around creating tables which have real plates and cutlery and crockery for children. We have family photos up on the wall. We have wallpaper up on our walls as well. And it just provides, again, for that really nurturing environment for our wee people, because, again, some of them don't come from homes like that, and it's really important that if we were to impact on this poverty-related attainment gap, in the early years, attachment and well-being is one of the huge drivers that we need to make sure we're getting right for all of our wee people.
As well, we've invited families in to have lunch. We've just been in the very early stages of that at Nethermains, and Jem is the same. We're looking to really drive this on further, but parents have been asking, because their children is in nursery all day for the long hours, that they would like to see what lunchtime looks like. So we've actually had them in eating with their children, and it's been really positive as well. We have worked hard with our both establishments, and we've got a shared vision with our team now that we don't just want snack and lunchtime to be a routine. We want it to be a real rich experience, and throughout that, through self-evaluation, we've realised that we now provide baking and cooking as a core experience in our day, and that's obviously been really positive. And within these core experiences, we can incorporate health and wellbeing, literacy and numeracy for our young people, and the results we've been finding out of that has been really positive as well. And at the same time, it's developing children's risk awareness. They're using real life tools, they're baking real food, so as Jem is saying, there's that real ownership over it, and they're wanting to eat it. We're seeing massive improvements.
So Marvellous Mealtimes is, I would say, isn't only focused on food and eating and things. So we've saw a huge increase in children's skills across all levels of curriculum and building ambition as well. So it's about exploring new textures and developing children's senses, developing positive relationships and friendships with others, having that social time to sit, to speak to their friends. We do a free flow routine, so children choose when they want to come. So if they're working on a boat like they were last week outside, instead of being called, right, it's your time for lunch, actually we're giving them time to see projects through, to see their play through, and then they can decide with their own peers when they want to come and access lunch. Obviously, for protocol and things like that, lunch opens at 11:30 and it closes at 1, because we've got to think about heating and temperatures and all the practical side of things as well. But again, that increases children's awareness of food, positive associations. We're developing that independence, that capacity for choice as well, which again will transfer into adulthood for them as well.
So our next steps on Marvellous Mealtimes are that we want to continue cooking and baking in our ELC establishments as a part of our core learning day. We want to promote children's choice in choosing and preparing the foods that they're going to be eating, and we have had a meeting with the catering team and we've got a vision for how we're going to be moving forward with that. We're wanting to continue to share this approach in not just our establishments but with improvement methodology in mind. We started small in our establishments. It's really working. We can see huge benefits. So now we're in the process of scaling and spreading up across the authority. And myself and Gemma are working with some establishments at the moment to help devise this approach. We've also, I will mention here as well, we've also devised a floor book between ourselves, and we're able to share this with colleagues across the authority, and it's just our journey, and then there's a bit at the back for self-evaluation for how they could take forward their journey, and we've displayed like more of our run charts and stuff. We would have you here all day if they were up there.
So I also think it's important to say that the Scottish Government have been into both establishments to have a look and observe lunches and have validated that and are doing a case study on Bow House and Nethermains that will be shared across Scotland for 1140. Myself and some of the team at Bow House are also in the middle of writing a case study for a new book that will be published by Strathclyde University on promoting children's voice and choice and building that capacity. So I mean, this is really making an impact, and it's really getting people talking and thinking about 1140 a wee bit differently as well. One of our biggest next steps is to think about a ladder within our settings that has kind of core provisions that we might need every single day, again to promote choice. So you might get a wee one who comes to you and says, actually, I'm not wanting to eat pie today. As many 3 or 4-year-olds do at 11:30. But at the minute we don't have the capacity to go and say, right, well, what do you want? Because we do snacky foods, but we've not got anything to make pasta or baked potatoes. So our view is that we have choice, again, for foods where our wee people can go in the morning and think, well, actually, Gemma, I want pasta with cheese sauce today. And again, we're promoting that choice, we're promoting that independence, we're getting them involved, we're looking at how we can get families involved as well, promoting that big cook, little cook throughout our sessions, so that then this transfers into home life as well. Because if we can do what we can in nursery, it needs to transfer into home life as well to make the biggest impact. So that's where our next steps are going.
Yep.
Yep.
Can I say thank you very much, ladies? That's very well done. I wish you the very best of luck, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm. You might get some visitors that want to come at lunchtime, some big cooks, or some that may just want to try the salubrious menus within some of our early years settings. But thank you and well done.
I suppose on reflection, rather than us tell you what's going on, I think you can see just some of the marvellous achievements that we're getting in about. This is the early adopter scheme, but phased in early years, is learning. And when things aren't right, looking at it innovatively, creatively, to try to change it, to change the establishment, to change the way that we do that. And I think the girls, both Gemma and Ashley, have done a fantastic job in stepping up to it and challenging that. And we're open to change. I think as we go through the whole early years thing, I've said all along, this is a stepped, phased approach. We may not get it right, but the thing is we know when we don't get it right and we can take steps to change it. And I think that philosophy is built into everything we do. And I just thank the girls again for doing it, and some of the marvellous work they're going to do will also be permeating throughout Scotland as good practice. So that's it. So, back to the report.
Can I ask a question? First of all, sometimes we sit here and we wonder, we debate for hours policies and we wonder where they go. I think the girls have shown that they go above and beyond on occasion, and that's reassuring. Can I ask the director or any of his team, are we rolling this across the whole of the district?
I'll come on to that when we get to the report, Councillor John, if that's okay. It's a critical part to it. It was a flavour, bad pun I suppose, a flavour to the report. There are a couple of recommendations that are tied up towards delivering that in the report. Okay, the report itself. I suppose in reflection, when we're writing this report, the Chair said it is another update report, but looking at it, I was summarising it. There's progression made, supporting the local economy, investment in infrastructure, investment in creating jobs. There's innovation. There's challenges that we face now and in the future. There's evidence of partnership working, and they're supporting the poverty strategy, and there's steps to be taken to address the gender and age inequality that we've got with the workforce. So, dwelling on that, I hope you'll see that as we go through the report. There's two main purposes of the report. They're outlined in section 1.1. There's 7 recommendations brought to Education Executive today, and they're contained in section 2.1. I'll come back and summarise them at the end of the report. Section 3 summarises some of the background to it, and based on the 3.1 summarises that in terms of the projects that we reported to the Education Exec back in January, significant work has been still taking place on developing design and access options for the 5 major projects that were discussed back in January. Section 3.2 confirms that discussions have been taking place with our partner providers, and there's a number of proposals in the paper today to help support them. With exactly what we've seen with some of the things we're trying to do in establishments, supporting them with accelerated and phased implementation so they too can learn from the experiences and stepping up as we phase together to deliver 1140 hours. And the 3.3, the report also, more importantly, provides an update on all these work streams. Section 4.1 looks at some of the major projects. Without going through them individually, I'll draw your attention to the Hall Glen one, that we're probably about a week away from finalising the design plan and getting the cost. The cost envelope just now is only about £2 million for the early years part, and about £0.3 million would provide an on-site production kitchen for exactly the thing we saw earlier on, to produce the meals that are put out to our establishments to deliver the marvellous meal times in Falkirk that we hope to do. Once we get that agreed, I hope to report back to the next one that work will be on site starting around May with a completion date of December 2019. One of the challenges that were raised the last time was around the Kineglass Social Work Office in Bo'ness. And I think it was Councillor Bissett that raised the challenges for us around access, car parking, drop-off, segregation, etc. We are working those just now, and the next report we bring will hope to address that. A lot of these things, the design stuff takes time to do, it takes time to look at, but please be assured that once it's raised with us, we will take steps to make sure we come back here to make sure people are happy with what we plan to do. Also, the Calendar Park Business Nursery outlined in section 4.1.4. The capacity at the moment, we're estimating it will provide capacity of about 40 to 3 to 5 year olds, and we're working with the care inspectors now to work out the capacity for the outdoor satellite site. The business park itself suffered some flood damage through the recent bad weather, so the team that are involved are trying to remedy that flood damage before we can get in and about it to make sure it's fit and ready. We hope to be bringing it on stream in August of this year. 4.2 gives a very brief update, and it is brief. Councillor Alexander will probably note it. In terms of the current projects, the 13 projects that we referred to the last time, they are all on track to meet the dates that we said at the last Education Exec meeting. Not resting on our laurels, section 4.3 outlines a further proposal to bring through a further 3 projects that we feel that we can accelerate and deliver earlier than anticipated. Those 3 individual projects are outlined in section 4.3. If approved, it would mean that we would have in place 26 projects that would be due for completion by February of next year, and that would provide 140 capacity for just under 1,500 places just now, and that information is contained in section 4.3. In terms of I mentioned earlier on, to support our partner providers with it, there's outlined in section 4.4 are a number of proposals. Regular meetings take place with our partner providers, and indeed were supported by the Scottish Government Early Years team. It's very important we work with our partner providers, because we need them to achieve ultimately the aims that we set ourselves in delivering the 1140 targets that we've spoke about for the last 2 years now. That's phasing in of the implementation of it, giving them some additional capacity to support them progressing their plans, and that's critical to it. It's very important when we're phasing in, people can get a chance to look at it rather than just start to deliver on day one. If they can get a chance to phase in, they can learn from it. There's various things that we can learn from the experience of how we set up and lay out the establishments. Staff training are a couple of things that could be looked at. And it's also that we take the chance to, where we can, offer an increased package that would provide additional flexibility for parents and families. The Children's Services are therefore proposing the following: that all existing partner provider nurseries, we've got 13 currently in partnership with us, that we're proposing that they increase their funding place offer to 940 hours from the start of the new term in August. That the hourly rate currently paid to them is increased by £5 with effect from April, and that we set aside the sum of £65,000 that we directly allocated to support the private provider nurseries with training or any transitional work that they feel is required to meet the aims of the overall expansion plans in general. And that's key. Any work that they do would have to meet the overall expansion plans, so it gives everyone in the system added value. All of these proposals can be met from the 1920 financial resources that we have and are costed in section 6.2. Proposals also to, and this is going back to the Marvellous Mealtimes that Ashley and Gemma so eloquently presented at the start. I mentioned earlier on that children can be in our establishments for up to 10 hours a day, and the old traditional time for a meal can be there, but it's more important that we have a flexible approach to children in meal time. Children may be used to a snack or pick and mix throughout the day. It's very important that we look at all that and see what can be developed to ensure children throughout the 10 hours can have access to food. Not just hot food during a very quick 30-minute snapshot at lunchtime. And Gemma and Ashley are testimony to some of the innovative and creative ideas that we're looking to take on. In section 452, we mentioned the fact that the challenges have been looked at. Marvellous Mealtimes in Falkirk has been adopted as a catalyst for change, and I think the phrase "we people" is quite apt, because some of the things that you take for granted for a primary one at 4 and 5-year-old may not suit a 2 and 3-year-old in terms of cutlery, in terms of size of chairs, in terms of size of equipment. So the wider connotation for us is we've got to make sure the equipment that we have and the furniture is fit for purpose and suits our wee people. And we're going to coin that phrase now because we quite liked it, thank you very much, that we've got to make sure our wee people get something. And it comes back to the paper earlier on about raising attainment. If we get it right at this stage, it's a good step progress to make sure we close the poverty-related attainment gap, and that's why it's very important we get it right. In section 453, the proposal is that we are going to second a senior cook for a period up to 23 months, and they will look and support with colleagues in these establishments and others. They'll look at portion sizes, meal choices, nutritional content, 3-tiered delivery model, provision of serving food, and also importantly, suitable furniture and equipment for our wee people. It's not just about going to a catalogue and getting what's there for traditional primary schools. This is looking innovatively at what suits our wee people, and that can be quite different. In section 454, we're also proposing that, and again this goes back to looking at the closing the poverty-related gap, the poverty strategy. We're proposing that from August 19 we stop charging for nursery snacks in all our establishments. This supports the Council's poverty strategy, and it also eliminates the bureaucracy associated with trying to collect the cash, and more importantly the stigma that can relate to it at a localised setting for doing that. Although the estimated cost is £125,000, we think it's right to do that, and what we'll try to do is make sure that by way of devolved funds to schools, they get that money to provide that snack, but it will be aligned to the findings that we mentioned earlier on to the Marvellous Mealtimes, across the meal delivery. So rather than just snack, it'll be a holistic approach to how we deliver meals, and that money will be given to schools to support them with that. 4.6 looks at the workforce development strategy. It's very important that we had a really high number of modern apprentices that were recruited. It's been highly effective. The report highlights that we've got 29 modern apprentices already in post to support the implementation of 140 hours. We also expect a further 16 will be qualified and will be in post by August the 20. And that's testimony to what we're trying to do, create a stepped career path from all of our early year professional staff. And I'm delighted, Jim and Ashley, just two examples of the type of professional staff that we're bringing in to the system and the service, and we're delighted to be able to do that, and we're also enthused by it. The aims are also laid out in section 4.6. It's very important that we do create a diverse workforce. We proactively address the gender and age imbalance, and we're doing that in a number of ways. We're working closely with the college. We're trying to recruit older people into it with the experiences, maybe not have the qualifications at the time, but if they've got the rest of the experience, what we're trying to do is give them training on the job. Also try to look at how we take on a further 75 staff between now and August of 19. Again, it's a challenge for us. So it's 75 FTE. It may well be that the numbers when we do bring them on are 90 to 100. It just depends on what we do. But certainly 75 FTE posts will be recruited between now and the summer. And that's the work of the central team with our human resources team to do that. And I wouldn't underestimate that, because the time it takes to do the recruitment practice, and that's why we've got to make sure, and you've done it so far, support the central team to have that resource to do it, and do it quickly when it's needed. Very pleased to report in section 4.7 the Scottish Government have given us more money. The Government have identified £4 million of additional funding over the next 2 financial years. The aims of the funding are outlined in section 4.7. I'll not go through them. Falkirk's share of the funding is just under £124,000. Officers are currently working up a submission for that, and it's due to be in by the Government by the end of this week. And one of the recommendations will report back on what that submission is at the next meeting. One of the things it does support is trying to do is possibly create an accredited training centre in Falkirk that enables us to do on-the-job training that's accredited. So when we're bringing external staff in of all ages, all genders into the system, we can train them on the job and make sure they realise the potential to have that professional workforce, and that's what we're striving to achieve. So that's one of the things that we're looking to do just now. I'll give you full details of that in the next report. 4.8, and again I can't say that having the central team, both in terms of within Children's Services and the design team and development services, have proved an absolute bonus. Some of the councils that weren't as effective as ours are sometimes struggling to do that. We've had the team in place, and thanks for the support. We are looking to strengthen it, and we're looking to create 2 posts. The post there, it's a quality improvement officer and a team leader for early years. The titles may change, but the fact is that quality is the key here, and we now need to bring somebody in to oversee the quality across all our provision, not within our own settings, but within the private providers, and also looking at the childminder as well. So that's somebody to do it. We need these people in post next year, so we're asking just permission to do that. Those posts were already included in the funding bid that we put in, so they're included in the funding that we got. One of the things in 4.9 that often we get wrong is communication. Communication is always the things that people get wrong. We've identified that communication is key here. The early years team are already out and about looking they hold quite a substantial number of information evenings for parents for those settings that are looking to be phased in. We will continue to do that. Over and above that, we've also got to look at a number of new and innovative ways. Innovation here. How can we communicate the key messages to parents? And also how can we get out there and get the message to get people that want to apply for jobs to come into the Falkirk area and work in early years. So it's a twofold thing. We're looking at it, and we'll probably report back on that in the next couple of reports as to how we intend to do that. But it is very important that we get the message out to parents so parents know what's there, what's available, and at the same time try to attract people into the profession. 4.10, I'm also pleased to say that we're about to undertake a bit of work to review our current emissions policy. Current emissions policy is very much geared to catchment areas. Because of the approach taken for early years, where it's a ward approach, we've got to look at how the emissions policy dovetails and aligns to those two key things. Very pleased to say that we're going to work with our RIC colleagues to jointly do that work, and further reports on that will come out as and when we come up with that. Consultation 5.1, all I can say there is consultation is constantly ongoing in early years. Section 6 outlines the financial implications both for capital and revenue funding. Capital funding is on track to spend what we've got for this year, and I'll report back as we go through next year with the capital funding. Revenue funding, in terms of the proposals today, the consequence of that is £704,000 of revenue expenses in 1920. That money is contained within the funding that we've got from the Scottish Government, and we remain firmly committed to make sure that we deliver the projects both on time and in line with the budget that we have. Section 6.4 outlines the risks, and I'm sorry to say it, Brexit is now included in the risk, because it's only right that we point out that with Brexit there is a potential disruption to possibly supply chain, price inflation and the non-availability of materials. We don't know that, but it's right at this point that we highlight that we know about these risks and we take steps through our business continuity plans to negate some of the risks that we've identified. The conclusions are set out in section 7, and I'm happy to take any questions from any of the members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Again, another fulsome report, and one with a lot in it, a lot of diverse aspects to it within the service. But it is all good news. Councillor McHugh.
I think in the first off, I really want to highlight the fact that this report, I believe, highlights the fact that Gary Greenhorn, Karen Thompson and their whole team have been flexible and considerate. They have engaged with every persons within the whole development of the project, and they have listened. They've listened very, very closely, and they've implemented. They've changed the pathways, and they've changed some of the plans they had, and that in itself is excellent, because it then empowers our parents to actually shape their children's future. And as it's already been highlighted numerous times this morning, the early years, the incredible early years, is the most important part, as our young people, our wee folk, our wee people, step into our education and care establishments, that they feel right away that they're ready to learn and to attain what their hopes are in the future. And it's so important that our parents are along with that. As Councillor Reid mentioned earlier about parents' aspirations, then this gives our parents the opportunity to shape the ways of the future, and that's unique. This is a unique time, I think, within the early years, and for me it's just fantastic, because it's something that obviously I've worked in for a long time, which I've said regularly. Can I just say thanks to the ladies there, because that presentation was excellent, and it's music to my ears. You know, for years and years in day nurseries, and some of the food that used to be provided was not suitable for our young children. And as parents, most of us sitting here all our parents worry. The food is a worry. The worry that they didn't eat, the worry that they eat too much, the worry that they didn't eat the right things, and to look at that, take it out of the whole curriculum and make it a focus is fantastic, and it's an excellent way forward. And I'm so glad that we're setting the ways there within Scotland. It's excellent. The thought of wee children going into a dining room, initially when we spoke about it, my immediate reaction, obviously with the experience that we have, I thought, oh no, you know, and food is a huge issue. So if we can create something that encourages children to eat and educates them in the ways forward, then we can only get a healthier workforce in the future. But appreciate everything, all the work that's been getting done. Looking at the consultation with parents and with the other stakeholders, consultation is a key, and as I've said, you know, we can't do enough consultation, and it is definitely shaping things. I'd maybe like to suggest that we do a bit more further consultation in the public's eye. You know, letting the public see where all this money is actually going and why we're doing it. So I could maybe suggest that we could set up some roadshows, maybe in our town centres throughout, and it also engages parents that or parents of the future, ones that have not actually thought about having children yet, that it's no scary, because there is places out there that can get support. Honest.
It's a hard sell.
we need kids. It's very selfish actually, because I'm going to be old at some point and I'm going to need somebody that knows what they're doing to look after me. I'd also like to suggest maybe that we could have a members briefing for the other members within our council, so they can grasp the whole project, because it is huge and it's worth millions of pounds, but it's shaping the future, as we've said, for our children, and that is so important. And it would be good if the full council could get an insight into that.
Can maybe look at a strategic point where that would be useful. And I know that we did some wee slideshows last year after the new nurseries open. Perhaps if we can't take members to the nurseries, perhaps we could bring some of the nurseries to the members. I think that might be a way forward, and I think it would certainly be interesting. Well, I was going to suggest that maybe, you know, some of the wee people might want to come along and see us very briefly. They might bring some cookies with them, David. There's some bake.
Only healthy ones, I hope.
Is that you?
No. Early years obviously support parents in their life choices, as they're supporting the children in their life choices. And this project again has created a career structure for early years professions, and is encouraging people from all aspects of life into early years profession, and that in itself is excellent. We're bringing on more staff, we're creating more jobs, we're educating our young children for the earliest stages. This is just a fantastic good news story that we're moving forward throughout Scotland, but it's great that Falkirk are right up there leading the way. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Cawley.
I'll make this fairly brief. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for the presentation. I've heard a little bit from the head teacher at Nethermains around the big chef, little chef, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. And I think, you know, it's very clear that you are leaders for this district, and indeed looking at promoting children's choices, actually leaders across Scotland, and I think that's absolutely brilliant. I think the note about the significant amount of investment that is going in, and the significant amount of investment that is ongoing, but I did want to say that the charge for the removal of the charge for snacks, I think that's money well spent, and I think we would all be in agreement with that, I hope. And finally, just building on what Councillor McHugh said, in terms of the comm strategy, I think, you know, that the Children's Services should use elected members and the networks we have to try and spread the word, and that was the only thing I would say.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. It's just a question in relation to item 7 at the foot of page 48 regarding Kinglass Social Work Office. And on the back of what the education portfolio holder has just said regarding the consultation being a priority, my understanding is that the consultation exercise in relation to this was carried out some 2 weeks just before Christmas. Now, obviously, families have a lot of other things on their mind at that time of year, and I'm led to believe that there was only 3 people turned up for the consultation. I'm not sure if that's right, but that's the information I've been given. If that's the case, would the administration consider going back out to consultation again?
Gary, do you want to give us a wee bit update on?
I can, certainly, Councillor Nimmo, I can confirm the information that you got was wrong. There was probably about 14 to 16 people turned out for it. We do appreciate that it was done just before Christmas, but when you're trying to do these major projects, time is of the essence, and sometimes you've just got to simply do it. What I can confirm is that every every parent that we felt would be involved in it was lettered. So every parent had the chance to either come along to the meeting or could have submitted any comments to a generic email address, and they were being picked up and included in the consultation. So we did that, and there's only so much we can do when we do go to consultation. So what we did there was no different from any other consultation. I do accept it was done before Christmas, but in these projects, time is absolutely critical, and we really need to get on to deliver it. But certainly, letters were sent out to all the parents who we felt would be involved in that in the Bo'ness area. And from memory, there was about 14 to 16 turned up in the Bo'ness Academy that night. I was there, and Karen was there, so I can testify to that. And the findings from that were reported back to Education Exec quite correctly in the previous report.
Thanks for that, Convener. I'll get back to my source and correct them.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And is it Karen yourself? I wasn't sure.
Firstly, just again to say thank you to Gemma and Ashley. I actually got quite emotional watching that. It was amazing, so thank you. Again, talking about consultation with parents, and I suppose the thing for me is that, do you know, we have a parent representing primary and a parent representing secondary, but given the scale and the expansion of this, do we need to think about how we get the views of parents within the early years sectors? Because I'm very aware that at our parent council, we're trying very hard to get nursery parents on board, but it kind of feels that a lot of consultation with parents only begins once they go to school. And I wonder, do we need to think about how do we get better at involving parents within the early years? Because I know certainly at the Falkirk Parent Area Forum, I don't think anyone comes along representing nurseries. It's very much the schools, and I just wondered if that's something that we need to consider moving forward.
Perhaps we can maybe have a look at that and look at the role of each of the bodies, the parent forum, etc., and see how we can improve that particular contact. Councillor Bissett, you wanted to come in?
Thanks, Convener. I as well would like to thank Gemma and Ashley for their contribution. I thought it was a very professional and confidently presented and informative presentation. I would just like to ask one question and make an observation. I'd like to ask, are the private nurseries going to roll out the marvellous mealtimes as well, or are they being encouraged to do that? And Gary said he was listening, and indeed he is, because one of the previous executives I did mention about the private nurseries and the amount of hours they had, and I'm glad to see that it's been increased now, and because we might need them at some point in the future. And that's really all I had to say.
Okay, Gary?
Yeah. It's a very good point that Councillor Bissett made, and indeed I'm glad that you recognise that we do listen, we do, that's our job. One of the next stages of engagement with our private nurses, and there's two of the members in the back row listening today, that we'll be sitting down to look at with them how we can support them with the rollout of the meals and the meal provision. It's a universal meal provision from 11:40, but those children who are in private nurses just now who are entitled to free meals would get them. So yes, we need to look at it, and we probably need to get the proposal agreed today for the steps we're taking in terms of the senior cook, but that senior cook's remit would also expand to supporting the private nurseries if indeed they require any support as well. So the answer is yes.
Okay. Councillor Reid?
Yes, thanks again, Ashley and Gemma. It's always a pleasure to see someone under the age of 30 in these rooms, to be honest.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah.
For experience.
Indeed. You spoke about gender in terms of recruitment. It's often cited that some children have no males in their life for whatever reason, and there was an emphasis on males coming into primary schools at one point. How are we doing with nurseries?
At the moment, we have a small cohort of male in our modern apprenticeship scheme. We've actually, the ones that have been permanently appointed to the authority that Gary mentioned in the paper, 2 of them have just recently completed their modern apprenticeship and now have been appointed into permanent jobs within the council. There's still another 2 in the cohort that is about to graduate in time for August 20, but we are working with schools and the employee training unit to highlight that as a career regardless of gender.
Yeah. Especially when there are jobs available, it'd be good for males to think about that.
I have to say I'm really proud of our males that have just graduated. They're very lovely, nurturing young men, and they absolutely see their role in an establishment for children who maybe don't have that positive male role model.
Yeah, that's good. One question about the figures. Is it not a case that some of these figures will be of an annual nature rather than just applying to 1 year? I mean, the subsidy to the private nurseries will continue every year, won't it?
Yes, a lot of our figures are for financial years, but a lot of the things we do in early years are aligned to academic years. So we've tried carefully to balance up between what's in the budget for next year against additional cost on an academic year session. But the figures, in terms of the private providers, that are there are the additional cost for what we expected to pay in the next financial year, 1920.
And the year after that?
Yes.
And the year after that?
Yes.
Right. So these are having an impact on our future budgets?
Yeah, the budget is there in future years. It's just to say that it's stepping up in 1920, but the budget is there for 1920, so by inference the money we've got for the government includes the full cost of that going forward in the years to come. So just to say, this is the additional cost of agreeing to the proposals that we've put before the Education Exec today.
Finally, I think we have to thank Gary and his team. I said to the director, I just don't know how he does it, between community transfer of halls and the school estate and nurseries. I think it deserves a rise, just like the teachers, to be honest.
Taking the rise
A
now.
wee bit of cooking, that'll give you a rise.
Gary does it for the pleasure and enjoyment of seeing the achievements. Absolutely. Councillor Murtagh?
You can absolutely tell that as well in the delivery. Like everyone else, I was also getting slightly emotional listening to the emphasis and the passion coming across from two very clear professionals that we are lucky to have in Falkirk, and thank you for the work that you're undertaking. I think that it gives us that opportunity to again talk about how health and well-being is a core part of our curriculum and should be seen equally against the other parts of our curriculum as essential for development right from early years all the way through to when our children leave for their positive destinations. And that is often lost in some of the measurements which we're looking at when we're looking at league tables, but it's essential for the life skills of our young people turning into adults, and that all begins at early years. So I think it's really critically important that we focus on that. I think that again I would agree that it's sitting on parent councils for many years, that desperation to pull in parents from nursery, if only so we can get them to stay through the primary time, but the needs of parents and young people, our wee people, although I have to say my youngest wee person is now rivaling me in height, and I'm going to disregard her from that category just for the sake of that, but they are very different as they progress through, and I think that one of those key things, as was being said, is when you have a child even going to primary school, your fear as a parent of how they will cope just with going to the dinner hall, how will they feed, all those things. You worry about them reading and writing and their friendships, but you worry about that, and it's great to see that focus and the understanding of the topics within that. And again, the emphasis on communication back to the parents. I mean, that's key. We can do all this great work, and we can have all these, we can be looked at as an authority all over Scotland, but if we don't communicate that to the parents, then we're not going to see that mutual success at home. So I really welcome the approach that's being taken on that, and I think that's excellent. Again, Councillor Bissett was saying that Gary listens on the demonstration of the private nursery element, and I think as well on the childminder element. It's a balance of many things which is going to make up our 1140 hours, and it's really that ethos and understanding about how what we've developed transfers through. And I'd like to think that it's not a case that when we're 2 and then 3 and then 4 and then going to primary school, that our children suddenly tick a box that, oh, now they can use this or now they can do that. They're all different, and perhaps even further up the school estate there'll be benefits to learn from this work that's being done that can be transferred into that, to those approaches and learning. I'd like very much to think that this could feed into that, and that other members further up in our educational establishments will be able to take that ethos forward. So I'd very much like to commend that approach. But just really to thank those that are involved in this work, and that we continue to look at all aspects of what's being delivered within our 1140 hours and the individual needs of the children going forward within the meal times has been really crucial to the success of their schooling overall. But thank you for your hard work.
Okay, thank you. Nigel?
Thanks, Convener. It's nice to see we've got a report on progress, and there's some progress being made with the PVI partners. I think the last report we had at the exec was back in last September when they got a mention. I was interested in the comment that was made about the private sector, that I think the words used were we might need them. I think the Scottish blueprint for the rollout of the 1140 is quite clear, and the Minister for Early Years, Marie Todd, has made it quite clear that it is a partnership between the PVI sector, childminders, and councils. And far from actually a situation where we might need them, the Minister has made it quite clear consistently that to deliver 1140 throughout Scotland will require a good, strong partnership between private providers, childminding services and councils. So we are here now. The first question I've got is that in the paper you indicate there are 13 PVI providers within the Falkirk area. Can I just ask how many of those have actually signed up to the partnership? How many are on board with that?
Okay. All 13 are signed up. If you may remember, we took a paper to Education Exec probably about a year and a half ago to remove the barriers to entry. We had barriers to entry before, or perceived barriers to entry, so we agreed a universal entry requirement linked to quality of service and approach, that any of our private nurses who met those requirements would automatically get a contract with us for provision, joint provision of our early years. And just to confirm, Councillor Harris, that our submission to the government, we do need the private providers to have the capacity. So it was inherent in our submission that not might need them, but we do need them, and we need that input from the childminder as well. So that was an absolute implicit understanding of the submission we made to the government, that we do need to work with them.
Thanks, Gary. I'm pleased with that reassurance that was part of the initial submission. Obviously, we'd welcome the increase to 940 hours to be offered by August. Where does that figure come from, given that other adjacent councils to ourselves, like of North Lanarkshire, are offering 1140 hours to the private sector as of now? South Lanarkshire, I think, are offering to some, those presumably who are able to provide it. So I'm just wondering where that figure of 940 comes from, and why is it not 1,000? Why is it not 1140 for those who are able to provide it?
I think that was negotiated with the private providers, from my understanding, and what they felt they would be able to achieve and actually deliver within that timescale. Gary?
In terms of comparison, it's broadly comparable. Sometimes you're not comparing apples with oranges when you look at things, but what we've got in Falkirk is it's universal. So we're going out with everyone. Some other councils are phasing it in, linked to SIMD or geographic areas. So when they say they're doing it, they're not phasing it in to them all. We're saying it's universal, so all our private providers will move forward with it. The challenges we've got, if we move to 1140, it brings with it additional challenges of having to provide free meals. So we need that transition to work out to make sure that we're able to do it. So in terms of a comparison across our neighbouring authorities, we feel that broadly what we're doing is consistent with the approaches that they've taken. West Lothian, for example, are doing it, but they're only doing it, they've only got a very small number of their overall private nurseries in partnership with them just now. So again, we need to look at what sits behind some of the figures that have been quoted. But overall, we're certainly happy that we are in a place now, with the proposals, if they're agreed, that will be comparable with our local authority partners and neighbours.
Okay. And there is assurance that come 2020, August 2020, that there will be a full rollout to 1140 across the board.
Absolutely, that's what we're that's implicit. That by August 20, everyone that's in partnership with us will deliver 1140 hours.
Just one last question, if you bear with. We mentioned about childminders. Can you update us on the progress for that? There were a number of registered childminders who were on board at the last report. I see there's a report that discussion is ongoing. Where are we with that now?
So we're working in partnership with the Scottish Childminding Association, and as we phase in 1140 across our own establishments, we use that as the guide to invite childminders in that locality to apply for partnership through the Scottish Childminding Association, very similar to how we invite our private partners to apply in terms of meeting the grades from Care Inspectorate. We then, myself and a colleague from Scottish Childminding Association, then go out and visit them, and then we enter into partnership. I held an induction session 2 weeks ago with another 35 childminders who are about to come on board with us in line with our August 19 implementation for 1140. So we've explained what that process, what that means by blended approach for parents, that flexibility of choice for parents, and what they can offer in their local area. So it becomes quite complex because of the different models that we offer across the authority, and that's part of that induction process for childminders. So by August, we're probably in excess of about 50 childminders that we'll have in partnership, and that will scale up as we scale up across our own establishments.
Good, thank you for that. Okay. And just lastly to say, we obviously welcome the increase in the hours, the hourly rate for the PVI sector. Thank you.
Councillor Alexander.
Just to say that, and maybe it's a gender thing, but I didn't get emotional when I heard the presentation, but I did get hungry. Can I just say, just to acknowledge the part of the agenda, or the part of the report that deals with it's on page 48, in particular the work that's been undertaken with regards to Woodburn Nursery. Looking forward to seeing the design work when it's available. There's a few areas that I've come across that so closely identify with the local nursery school is that one, and so I'm particularly pleased that you've taken on board the suggestions that have come from the general public in that area and also elected members.
Thank you. Councillor Patrick.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I must say, first of all, of course, that like everyone else here today, our minds are getting concentrated on all food matters. I absolutely was delighted at the presentation and at the prospect that's before us, that for our young people, that the opportunities they will have to have some access to some really excellent food presented with a caring attitude indeed, perhaps slightly influenced by memories of school meals of another era, where I think it was mince was mentioned actually. I think perhaps that was the link that tied me into the past as far as school meals were concerned. Following up actually a last comment that Councillor Harris made. Obviously, I'm concerned that our partner providers are indeed fully brought into the picture. We really do desperately need the extra support that they provide, and I'm delighted to see that it will not be long within the plans that the full 1140 will be also provided there. As I understand it, members will probably excuse my years to say that my experience now of the nursery situation is perhaps less than some, but I do recognise that the partner providers fill an important gap, as well as a basic provision, fill a very important gap by covering the long periods that some of our families require, and up to the 10 hours that was mentioned by Gary. The increase, obviously, in the fee to £5 is obviously necessary and to that degree welcomed. But since we are very much concentrating on the need to provide appropriate meals and as well as snacks, that I wonder really how in actual fact this is going to be meaningfully provided within the £5 hour, when we allow for the fact that presumably part of that £5 will be required to provide for the private sector the necessary meals, etc. Could you just expand on that a little bit, please, Guy?
If there is any children in the private sector who qualify for free meals, we'll get a legal obligation to provide meals for them, or to provide compensation to the partner providers to provide the meals for those children. We have no children that's applied for that thus far. So just to be assured that if any children was in a private setting who were entitled to free meals, we would have to provide compensation to the partner providers, or indeed provide the meal to themselves.
Thank you, Gary, for that. And obviously, I certainly welcome the fact that the snacks will be free, and that also all people who are entitled to free meal provision will indeed be provided. That it's very important, that aspect. However, if I understand it correctly, the increase to £5 within the private sector will in fact still be required to make additional provision for the meals that will have to be provided. And I just wonder, really, are we being realistic in providing the £5? Are we be understanding of the dilemma which I would anticipate the private providers will have? Thank you.
The £5 does not include any provision of meals. If there was an entitlement to a meal, we would provide money over and above the £5 for that. We don't know what the rate is yet, because we've not had any applicants for free school meals within the private sector. So we'd have to take that on board to come. So just to reassure you that the £5 does not include the meal. So if there was meals to be provided, the figure would be a figure for meal compensation would be paid to the private providers over and above the £5. And that's in common and consistent with the way that other councils approach it as well.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we're happy to agree the report.
Can I just come back on a few points just before we finish up, Chair? Thank you. Just Karen, our parent rep, just the comments you made about parents from nurseries getting more involved in the parent forum, would truly welcome that. I think the nursery establishment over the last few years, it's always been seen as a more informal set up than a school is formally, and they engage with parents every day on a daily basis. But it would certainly be really good to encourage them to get more involved, and hopefully that will come through, just like what the presentation for the girls did earlier, engaging with parents and talking to them and encouraging them to get involved in the decision making actually of the way forward for education for all our age groups. So that definitely would be welcomed. I believe, David, that we're doing some work within our high schools to encourage young men to look at a career in early years, so that again would be welcomed. As far as our private providers go, it is difficult because these are private companies. These are businesses that have got a profit margin, and I think we've been very fair in the way that we've looked at our private providers, and given that come 2020, we'll be hoping that these private providers will be introducing at least the living wage to their staff. And obviously the money that we're paying into that from the Scottish Government will align with that. So our providers within the private sector are actually getting a decent pay for the work they do. Thanks, that's fine, Chair.
Okay, right, thank you for that. Councillor Coombs, you sneaked in the back. I'd actually closed the debate, so...
My light was on and she jumped in, to be fair. Anyway, I wasn't going to speak,
No,
so
I'm just
I'll make it
mindful of
quite
time.
brief. I know, which is why I wasn't going to speak. But I had actually thought a few thoughts about Ashley and Gemma's presentation, and I think that it's important, the work that they're doing, because as adults we're all aware that if you're upset or nervous in any way, it impacts on how you eat, and I think that also how you eating properly impacts on every aspect of our daily lives, including cognitive abilities. So I think that addressing that is a hugely important thing to do, and that they should be extremely proud of themselves. And I don't know how we make sure that they stay in Falkirk. I don't know, tie them to the school gates or something like that. Not sure if that's allowed. And just a general point of principle, Dana's just touched on it there briefly about the private nurseries. I think it is important. Of course, they are private businesses and they are running for profit. I think the two things, one, that they should be encouraged to get the living wage on there. But as I say, the main point of principle that I have is that we are using taxpayers' money to subsidise private companies. And I understand the need for it. And it would be more expensive there, to go down our own route. But I feel the same way about First Bus getting taxpayers' money, and INEOS for that matter. So before I get thrown out, I'll finish.
Okay, thank you, folks. We're in danger of starting to lose members, so if people are content that we just move on to the next item. Item 9 is a report on the consultation on the proposed mothballing of Porthkenna and Limerick primary schools.
Thank you, Chair. This report is coming back to the Education Executive following the request on the 4th of September to go out to consult with the parents on two provisions that potentially were earmarked for mothballing as a result of the decision taken at that time. The decision that members took at that time was where a primary school row has 10 or less catchment area pupils, as reported in the annual census, then the Director of Children's Services should consider this school for mothballing. The recommendations are laid out in 2.1, and I will come back to those later. The consultation exercise took place was an informal consultation, as there was no requirement in law to consult. However, Falkirk has good practice in terms of actually engaging with their communities when making such decisions. So the parents of both Porthkenna and Limerick schools who fell into the criteria of having 4 and 5 pupils respectively were consulted. A total of 40 letters were issued to the parents and the community that were affected, either children and young people who are currently attending the schools or likely to attend in the future year. Of the 40 letters issued, and the actual letter that was issued appended in 1.1a and 1b of the report, we have received 2 responses, and a summary of those responses are explained in Appendix 2. Those have been redacted in some respects to protect the identity of the individuals who did respond. Currently, neither of those parents have children at the school. They were future prospective pupils, and they had no objections to the proposal. The proposed way forward by Children's Services is to propose that Porthkenna and Limerick schools are mothballed at the end of the academic year, 2018-19. All the children currently enrolled at these schools that have applied for Primary 1 would automatically be transferred to alternative catchment schools, and that would be Beancross and Slamanan primary schools respectively. Following the mothballing, free home-to-school transport would be offered to the children living in the Limerick and Porthkenna primary school catchment areas who are attending their alternative catchment school, either Slamanan or Beancross. It is also proposed that if the parents of these children wish to transfer this year ahead of August, then we would look to facilitate that and provide appropriate transport for those young people as and when required by the parents. And if the report is moved today, then it is likely that a number of those parents may decide to take up those places following the Easter break. Currently, 2 staff that are working at the schools will be offered redeployment elsewhere in the service, and we will engage with the trade unions and the local negotiating committee for teachers in due course with regard to that particular piece of work. The demand for places at the schools will be reviewed annually, and should the situation change and the population, for whatever reasons, increases, then we would obviously be reviewing the decision to mothball the school. If the situation remains as is at present, following a 2-year period, a further report will be brought back to the Education Executive with further options. The financial implications are detailed in section 6.1. Again, the pupils would be accommodated within the identified schools, and the allocation of resources will be transferred to those schools as per the per capita formula and normal class configuration arrangements. There will be additional costs in relation to transport. However, these will be offset by the reduction in operational running costs and resulting in the temporary closure of both of these provisions and efficiencies from having fewer classrooms in operation. As I said earlier, there was no legal requirement to consult. However, we engaged in informal consultation. Any staff that are deemed surplus will be offered redeployment elsewhere. There will be no job losses resulting from this. However, what we will do is the overall number of teachers in the authority will reduce by those 2 individuals over the course of the year. Quality assessment found it was low risk. Sustainability, again, both of these schools will be required to be maintained in reasonable condition of wind and watertight basis, pending future decisions within the next 2 years. Again, the conclusion is that very low demand of places in both Buckkenna and Limerick School means that they are currently not viable and should be mothballed. Members are asked to consider to agree that Limerick and Buckkenna schools should be mothballed from August 2019, and that pupils attending these schools can transfer automatically to Slamanan and Beancross primary schools, and that the request is that you authorise Children's Services to put measures in place to support pupils transferring to alternative catchment schools during the current session, if that is requested. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, David. Councillor McHugh.
I'll move this report. As has already been covered, we took forward the consultation that was agreed in previous Education Exec committee meetings. There was no objections. The support is getting put in place to support the families with transport to the alternative school, and I just move this report forward and hope that we agree it today.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McHugh. Just remind members that this is about ensuring that our children all get a quality education, and within the limited experiences within the schools at the moment, because of the low numbers and the spread across the primary years, they're not getting the best possible experience. And should things change, it will be revisited. Is there any other questions? Any other? Councillor Alexander?
Happy to second the report, first of all, Convener. Can I say that the cultural change, that these kids are going to face from moving from a school with under 10 pupils to a busy school, it could be considerable. Can I ask what additional support can be put in place to accommodate that and to facilitate the transaction?
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor. As we say, any transfer of the schools will be liaising. Obviously, the current head teachers are responsible for those individual schools, so the pupils in Limerick already have regular contact with the head teacher at Slamanan, and the actual pupils are already attending those schools fairly regularly, so it won't be a culture shock necessarily, because they do engage on a weekly basis, and actually an increasing amount of their time is spent within the alternative provision to ensure that they actually do have that breadth of experience and opportunity to socialise in the larger groups and benefit from working in the larger class sizes. What it will do is make sure that they're there all the time and they can benefit fully from the educational experiences offered in both Beancross and Slamanan primary schools.
Okay, Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, Convener. One of the points I was going to make was just made there by Councillor Alexander about as we're talking about nurturing and the changeover. The other point I was going to make was in item 6.3, you've mentioned about the fact that there would be no job losses. However, obviously there's going to be less opportunities for teachers coming into work for the authority. And I just wondered if this is going to impact on our parent-teacher ratio. We're obviously going to have less teachers with that, and the changeover that was made from schools, teachers giving some of their times to nursery and things like that. So could you give me an idea as to how many, right, we're not having job losses, how many less opportunities we will be offering this August as opposed to previous years? Clear as mud, was it?
As David outlined earlier, the staff that are currently working in these two schools will go to work in other schools, so they won't lose their jobs. And there was a commitment made within the budget setting exercise at the end of February that Falkirk would remain aligned to the national pupil-teacher ratio, and that is our commitment.
Right. Will there be less teachers working for Falkirk Council this time next year as opposed to now?
I believe there will be.
Okay. And just as I said, it's I said at the time when this was moved, when's a closure, not a closure, when the Scottish Government says you can't close?
Well, the reason I can't give you an exact answer is that as yet I don't know what the pupil role will be, therefore I don't know what the teacher population needs to be to maintain the national pupil-teacher ratio. We don't know that until September census.
But as a general number, there will be less teachers working in the authority.
Well, it depends on the role. We're currently in a situation where the primary role is falling slightly and the secondary role is slightly rising. Those are the two drivers of how many teachers we ultimately employ.
Okay. But we do have a turnover of teachers in a year?
Yeah, I think it was about 130, they said, normally.
Okay, Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. I don't think it matters what you call it. You can call it mothballing. Personally, I think they're both closures. They're going to close within the next 2 years, so you might as well call it a closure, because that's what it's going to be. I'm just wondering, what are the financial implications regarding mothballing as opposed to outright closure?
Financial implications for us are allied to make sure that the buildings are maintained in a wind and watertight and reasonable condition. So we still need to spend some money, if required, on repairs and maintenance, especially the statutory stuff that we've got to do as well, to make sure that they are maintained to that reasonable level.
Are we able to put a figure to it, to compare the two?
It's quite difficult to do that, because you could go through a year without spending a penny. Then if there are bad weather or severe winds, you may have to do roof repairs and things like that. So it's quite a difficult thing to do. As a rule of thumb, two schools of that size would ordinarily have a repairs and maintenance budget of circa £8,000 to £10,000 per year.
And just the last question, Convener, do we have any proposals over the next 2 years as to what we're going to do with the buildings? What we're going to use them for?
I think that would be preempting the ultimate decision that this exec would make, because what David said was quite clearly that in the event of those catchment demand remaining under 10, we would have to bring another report back to Education Exec, firstly to get permission to close the schools. After the schools are then closed, it would be a matter for the Council's asset management team, in conjunction with ourselves, to work out what the future use and direction of those school buildings would be.
Okay, Councillor Alexander.
Yeah, Convener, the The issue of the schools is I'm surprised it's been raised this morning. Because my understanding was, my recollection was that the educational aspects outweighed any other considerations, and the well-being of the children involved in such unnatural circumstances where you have a cohort of from 5 to 11 amongst 10 pupils. My recollection was that that was accepted unanimously by all groups at the time of the original proposal, because the educational aspect outweighed any consideration for anything else. Can I say as well that there's approximately 46 job losses in terms of this year's budget, projected budget for next year. Not all, in fact very few, within education. In fact, most of the opportunities for new intake is through education or through children's services. But can I remind Councillor Nimmo that the last budget that he proposed had 232 job losses proposed for that particular year, and compare that to what we have at the moment. I think it compares very badly to the current budget that we have adopted as an authority. So jobs are important, but services are important, but most of all the children are the top of the table when it comes to importance.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Murtagh.
Absolutely, and to echo Councillor Alexander, I mean, obviously, as a local member for one of the schools, any change that's going to affect the community is, going to be engaged with and keenly felt. But I think we can, tell from the consultation and certainly the discussions I've had with members of the community there that even where they're not having a child directly within the school themselves, they understand that the educational attainment of those children, their educational experience, and being able to access the kind of opportunities that other pupils have, that is the priority. And as sad as it is when a school is mothballed, that has got to be the priority which we have all agreed on. And I think that we can't. I would not be in favour of preempting anything or looking at any kind of immediate closure, because we don't know what is going to happen in those communities over the next few years. And a very different part of my ward in Kinnaird, we'll have many discussions about the projected child ratios to households that vastly outstripped anybody's predictions by quite some way. I think more than double, shows that we can't predict what's going to happen with a school road, and we can only do our best projected planning for that. I have already, had discussions, although we don't know what the eventual outcome will be, that yes, as a local member, it would be absolutely remiss of me not to open discussions with, what's going to happen about those schools, what's going to happen at those buildings, about community access, and already begun those discussions with the department, because I think it's important that we reflect that our priority is absolutely the needs of our children, but that our community will have a right to be consulted and to understand what's going forward. So I think that it concerns me that it would be brought up about preempting and not looking at reviewing on an annual basis before we get to any kind of decision-making function what's happening with these schools, and certainly welcome that it is our children that are being put first and their educational attainment going forward. And I think the community, certainly in both Kenner, are supportive of that, and going forward I certainly support this report and the recommendations.
Okay, can we agree with the report? Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 10, Reading Support Service to Inclusion and Wellbeing Service 3 to 18. That's a bit of a mouthful. Okay, right, David.
Thank you, Chair. This is the report again responds to members' request to go out to non-statutory consultation to rename the current Mariner Support Service and Ox Gang Support Service. The report makes a number of recommendations in 2.1. Following the agreement to go out to informally consult, I asked David McKellar, who's the head teacher of Mariner Sports Service and Oxgang, as it's currently named, to engage with his community, to seek their views and opinions on the future names of the service. The details of that consultation are detailed in 4.4. The consultation took place between the 1st of October and the 21st of December last year. There were a total of 22 responses, and they were detailed below in terms of the breakdown. Can I also say that while the number of formal responses from the parents would appear to be low, the community had a lot of discussions with the parents. So there was a lot of consensus that unfortunately meant that the parents thereafter chose not to necessarily submit formal responses to the process, but there have been many more discussions as have been indicated. 4.6 makes reference to the preferred name being that of Inclusion and Wellbeing Service 3 to 18. However, other options were proposed in terms of Lauriston Campus or Lauriston School. However, we don't think that they are necessarily at odds with the ambition of the service. The Inclusion and Wellbeing Service 3 to 18 is the overarching banner, and those young people at Lauriston could have the Lauriston Campus, and other campuses could have the name and campus thereafter, and I think that would complement the work that's going on and would give an identity. Can I also say, it's not mentioned in this report, but all the children and young people involved will remain on their mainstream school role, because that's felt as important as identity for future applications beyond school, so that when they're talking about where they have been, they can talk about the high school that they are associated with, as opposed to mentioning some other service that maybe employers or other agencies may be less familiar with. So again, it's a working title in terms of the work that the provision is engaged in with our children and young people. So 4.7 makes it very clear that there's a clear preference for inclusion and wellbeing, and basically the report therefore asks that members would agree to support the wishes of the community in renaming the service Inclusion and Wellbeing Service. And I'm obviously happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Councillor McHugh.
I know.
Thanks, Convener. We'd just like to move this report. I think there's been quite a bit of stigma attached to particularly Oxgang over the years, and I think the service has often been referred to as them with behavioural problems. So I welcome the renaming Inclusion and Wellbeing Service, because that is what that service is about, looking at these children's well-being and making sure that they're included. Obviously, given that Lauriston, the campus is in Lauriston, then to name it Lauriston, as David has said, is appropriate, and giving these children identity with the area that they're being educated in is something that I welcome going forward. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody got any questions or comments in relation to it?
Second the report.
Thank you.
I don't wish to prolong things, just the change from Weirings Hall to Lauriston was a major change. I mean, it was positive with Dickensian Weirings Hall.
Absolutely.
The most convoluted meetings I've ever attended have been associated with renaming anything. The second most convoluted are deciding on a logo. So if you're deciding on a logo, just don't bring it back to committee.
I would agree with that.
On a more serious point, could I get a brief update as to how the children have settled into Mariner, off committee? Yeah. I think the convener would be interested in that as well. We just live across the road from the campus, so yeah.
I've actually.
Yeah.
Following for Councillor Reid, I've actually been down and was involved in the initial consultation with parents, and the service is second to none. As I was up at Weedons Hall visiting a few times myself, and it's second to none, the service that we're providing now for our children. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Noel.
Thanks, Convener. Also, I'm happy with the report. It sees a major project of the previous Labour-led administration coming to fruition at long last. I'd just like to take the opportunity to wish the pupils and the staff well for the future.
I do remember Councillor Coleman being one of the great advocates of the the building, and indeed saw the opportunity there, which was fantastic. Okay, we now move into the other half of our agenda, and it's foster care recruitment.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you.
The purpose of this report is to outline proposals and seek approval to support plans to significantly increase the number of local foster carers in line with the Children's Services Closer to Home strategy. Section 3 of the report provides background information and context in relation to the need to recruit more foster carers for Falkirk Council. At July 2017, there were just under 15,000 children looked after in Scotland. Just over 5,000 of these children were cared for by foster carers. At the same date, 137 children were placed with Falkirk foster carers. While Falkirk has fewer children looked after at home than other areas, proportionately more children looked after away from home in Falkirk are cared for in residential settings, with consequential financial implications. Children's Services has developed a long-term transformational strategy to manage the budget overspend and to address the shift that is required to address the balance of our current arrangements. Closer to Home is principally about improving outcomes for looked after children and young people and ensuring that services for the most vulnerable in our society are sustainable in the future. The strategy includes a number of projects which support the changes required to shift investment from expensive intervention measures, such as externally purchased care, to investment in earlier and local provision, delivered in partnership with other agencies and third sector organisations, and most importantly, our families. Research and feedback from young people tells us that children and young people do best when they're brought up within an environment of their own family wherever possible. Where parents are unable to provide direct care, every effort should be made to maintain the child or young person within the family network. When it's assessed as necessary to provide alternative care, this should be provided locally, as close to home as possible. To achieve this goal and bring the balance of care provision within Falkirk in line with other councils, a dedicated focus on foster carer recruitment and carer support is required, with the aim of substantially increasing the number of Falkirk Council foster carers. Increased provision of foster care is one of the Closer to Home priorities. Falkirk has an excellent record in retaining foster carers, with many providing care for decades. Carers are often the best recruiters. They attract new carers from within their own families and friends and neighbours. Our carers value the support and training received and the provision of fees when they do not have a placement. Another crucial factor is their determination as Falkirk residents to provide care for our local children. So although retention of carers is strong and the Council consistently recruits a minimum of 5 new carers each year, our carer population is ageing and current recruitment rates only maintain a standstill position of around 60 households. The Council is not managing to attract sufficient new inquiries, and many local residents are attracted to voluntary or independent providers who provide a more dynamic advertising and quick response to inquiries. To meet the demand we have for placements and the goals of the Closer to Home strategy, the Council require to attract a minimum of 30 additional foster carers over the next 5 years. To achieve this, a dedicated and competitive recruitment focus and marketing strategy is in development. Alongside our procurement colleagues, a quick quote tender process was progressed to recruit a marketing firm to take this forward, maximising use of social media and ring-fenced recruitment capacity. It is a key component of Closer to Home that ensure services are sustainable in the future, so part of this work includes ensuring that the fostering team develop the marketing skills to continue this work well beyond the contract period. The Council of the Future Change Fund supported this work with an investment of £50,000, which was much appreciated. Current care provision for children looked after away from home is presented at section 3.10 of the report. Section 4 of this report highlights for committee considerations of note, such as the geographical position of Falkirk between Glasgow and Edinburgh means that Falkirk Council faces really stiff competition from private and voluntary fostering agencies. Figures from Scotland Excel show that at least 150 carers in the Falkirk Council area are not council foster carers. Reasons for people choosing to foster for other agencies vary, but certainly include the marketing power previously mentioned and how the presentation of the fees are undertaken by these agencies. At 4.2 of the report, the complex and careful nature of the recruitment process for carers is noted, and for good reason. This is resource intensive. An increase of carer capacity by 30 carers, or approximately 45 children, added to the recruitment current level of 5 carers, the retiral of 5 carers per year, means that we need 55 new carers to be recruited over the next 5 years. At 4.4, detail is provided about the fees, allowances, support and development in place for foster carers. The allowance is designed to cover day-to-day costs of looking after the child, and there is progression up the skill level, which is dependent on evidencing enhanced skills. Suitably attractive fees are an important part of recruiting and retaining carers and being competitive with external agencies. External agencies often pay a higher fee. Falkirk has 3 fee levels currently. These have been static for over 10 years and are at the lower end of those paid by other councils and voluntary agencies. To competitively attract new carers and retain current carers, we are seeking approval to amend our Payment for Skills scheme to provide more appropriate and flexible care which meets the needs of the children requiring the care. The new scheme will incorporate 3 new skill levels. The first 2 covering entry and progression skill levels, with a 3rd bespoke level for carers who are able to offer enhanced care to children with more complex needs, such as those who are able to return from residential school. Bespoke packages are currently being piloted, with initial success in returning younger children from residential school settings. This is improving outcomes for the children and obtaining best value for the council. Some financial context for this approach can be found at section 4.8. An increase in fee payments to £150 per week per child for level 1 carers and £200 per week per child for level 2 carers. This would bring Falkirk fees in line with that being paid by other agencies and reflects a reasonable annual income to attract people to the fostering task. This is calculated as costing the council an additional £321,000 per annum compared to existing fee levels. This will be offset over time by the savings made by placing children in local Falkirk placements. A detailed breakdown is provided in the table at 4.7. Support for foster carers is critical. They undertake an enormously fulfilling yet at times challenging provision of care. The care they provide is directed by social work care plans, and there are high expectations from the service about the care being delivered. The requirements on top of family life can be intense. Detail of how we support foster carers is at section 4.9. One element of the support they receive relates to time off, annual leave. Carers can currently take up to 35 leave days over a year, which is double that than provided by most other local authorities and agencies. It is of note that the majority of our carers do not use all of their allocation. In consultation with carers, we are seeking to reduce time off incrementally to 21 days. Although time off is important, it often means a child needs to move to an alternative carer, creating stress for children who typically suffer with attachment, trauma and loss-related issues. This is not in keeping with the goal of relationship-based and child-centred practice, which is at the heart of Closer to Home. Our own care experienced children and CHAMPs have also told us that this aspect of their care does not enhance their sense of belonging, and they would like to see it changed. This has also been a feature of the discovery work of the Independent Care Review, which is ongoing. The option of special leave for emergency situations and unpaid breaks will remain. The saving realised from this reduction would be £31,000 per annum. At section 5, the consultation which has taken place in relation to these matters are noted. The proposals in this report have been subject to consultation with relevant staff, including children's rights staff, being considered by foster carers who have committed to work with us to develop this work. The Champions Board Young People have also given their views on what fostering should look like in Falkirk. Benchmarking comparisons have been undertaken with other councils. At section 6, financial and resource implications are laid out. At the budget meeting in February 2019, Council agreed to invest an additional £0.837 million investment to drive the shift in the balance of care from external to internal local provision, with the largest element of this relating to increase in foster care. The savings that will result from increased foster care provision will allow 45 or more children to be cared for in local fostering provision over 5 years, rather than in more expensive external out-of-area provision. This shift in balance of care is projected at £5.53 million over the period of the medium-term financial plan. That's between 1920 and 23-24. Resources required are noted at 6.2. And in conclusion, I refer committee back to the recommendations in section 2 of the report. The Education Executive is asked to approve proposed changes to the existing Falkirk Council Foster Carer Payment for Skills scheme and staffing structure as detailed at paragraphs 4.6 and 6.1 to attract local people to foster for the Council. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Members will have heard a lot about Closer to Home as a strategy. That strategy is now in the process of being implemented, and foster care is one of the key phases in actually delivering on that strategy. The importance being the welfare of our young people, and by having them cared for as close to home, maintaining family, social links, it achieves much better outcomes for them. But historically, we've not had a big base of foster carers locally, but we have had a very good, strong cohort. Like everything else, those people get older, like us all, and that needs to be replenished. This is giving us an opportunity to do a rather broader campaign than has previously been done, but also investing in our foster carers. Councillor Macaulay, sorry.
Change my name.
I know, well, you see it, McHugh and Macaulay, you're sitting next to each other.
I know. I'd just like to say I'm very pleased to see this next stage of Closer to Home come forward. I mean, we've got excellent foster carers, I think there's no doubt about that. They're hugely experienced. But, you know, yes, we all got older, and we do need to recruit more foster carers. I think the suggestion of increasing the fees to make this more attractive to people to come into fostering, I think is excellent, and the bespoke foster carers, because we know that some children have significant challenges, and to be able to support them in their own area with the right foster care is excellent. I mean, I think there's lots of things about money in here, but what it actually comes down to is keeping children and young people as close to home as possible. That's what it's all about improving their outcomes, about keeping their connections with other relatives when they're not, and friends and peer groups, when they're not able to stay with their parents. And I just quickly like to mention the Foster Carer Open Day, which has been held on the 17th of April. I was attempting to try and cut and paste a Facebook link to try and share it with people. But I think, you know, it's incumbent upon us all to try and share that as much as possible to improve the lives for children and young people in our area.
Okay, thank you. Any other? Councillor Bissett?
Thanks, Convener. I would just like to say, generally with foster carers, people want to foster care, they're not driven financially. So I wonder if there's any statistics or any information to support that increasing the funding would encourage more people to come forward. Or is it because the procedure is pretty difficult and can be quite horrendous to become the scrutiny you go under to become a foster carer? So is it maybe more that we should be looking at rather than the financial aspect? I mean, how much work's been done on it to decide to see how many people might come forward based on increasing the finances, or maybe giving better support to people going through the process?
Okay. Sarah?
As part of the process around the projects with Closer to Home and the recognition that we really needed to significantly increase our foster carer base, we spent a lot of time analysing what had worked previously, what hadn't worked, speaking to carers. As the report states, our current carer base are often our best recruiters, and what they have really strongly told us within everything else that we have proposed is that the fees really do matter, that we really are low, we've become low over time. And I think, Councillor Bissett, you're correct. I think foster carers would want committee to know that they are not financially driven, but there is an understanding and an acceptance that they need to be financially secure to be able to undertake this task because of the many demands that it makes on you. So we have benchmarked, we have talked to consultants and other kind of recruiters to ask them what their best advice would be. So there are various different elements to this recruitment package. Fee is one particular part of it, but from what we hear from our carers, and they can be very humble about it, is that money really does matter. It is a big task and it is a big ask, and over years we've fallen below, and it is certainly impacting on our recruitment.
Convener, so is there, do foster people applying, and I've every commendation for people that foster care, by the way, so are they given, people applying to become a foster carer, do they get support to go through the process, which can be quite difficult?
Yeah, the process of assessing a foster carer, it really is quite detailed. The report outlines that we reckon it takes about 100 hours from start to finish, and that whole process is laid down in the regulations that govern fostering. It includes PVGs, it includes health checks, it includes a home study, and prospective foster carers are given a dedicated social worker who undertakes that task with them and walks them through each step of the process. So there's a lot of home visits. As I say, there are medical appointments, there are group preparation groups, there are second opinion visits where another qualified person will come alongside it. So it's a pretty stringent process, but they're absolutely taken through it by their dedicated worker who, once they're approved, usually becomes their support worker, their supervising worker as they begin the fostering task. And once they are approved, there's mandatory training, there's personal development, there's a whole scheme to continue to support them.
Okay, Councillor Murtagh.
Yeah, I'd just like to formally second the report and say there's a lot of good detail you've outlined and given in your responses some clarity on the detail that's contained therein. As Councillor Colley was saying, I think it's important to get that message out there that we have consulted and listened and are aware of the challenges that we have faced in Falkirk and that have come up over time. We do need to recruit new carers. We have that significant challenge to go ahead, which we are now putting in these measures today in this report to try to combat that and continuously keep that under review. And I think that it is important that all elected members engage with our communities. That there are people out there who would desperately like to foster and care for young people and probably feel that they don't have the skills or they are anxious about the financial commitment or what needs to be in, and that message that comes from this committee that they will be supported and taken on that journey. There is that support, there is the financial recognition there of the obstacles, and given that there are many people within our community, as you said, who do foster and care for others but just not for our authority, there are those people already within our authority prepared to do that. This report is really good at understanding those barriers, trying to address them, and I think I'll certainly be taking from the committee that message to parents and to members in our community of all types that fostering is an option that they could consider and that they will be supported. So thank you for the detail in the report itself and answering these questions today and second the report.
Okay, Councillor Reid. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, if there is no other questions, we're happy to give the report. Okay, the final item. First of all, we are reaching just about 12:30. Are people content that we continue beyond the 3 hours and complete the... Okay. Just before we start and have to stop. The final items, item 12, child tax and universal credit. Sarah?
Thank you, Convener. The purpose of this report is to update members on guidance being provided to social workers, housing and finance staff who may receive a request to validate a benefit support application for a child conceived without consent. This relates to the Child Tax Universal Credit 2-child cap exemption. On the 29th of May 2018, the Education Executive considered a report related to a motion and requested a report on staff training needs, appropriate referral routes and any additional resources. Background to the Child Tax Universal Credit 2-child cap exemption is detailed at Section 3. A number of exceptions to the cap exist and are noted at 3.3. One of which allows women to claim for children born as a result of non-consensual conception. This is defined as a child likely to have been conceived either as a result of a sexual act to which the woman didn't or couldn't consent, or at a time when the woman was in an abusive relationship, under ongoing control of coercion by the other biological parent of the child. A woman can qualify for the exception whether or not there has been a criminal conviction. However, she cannot currently be living with the child's other biological parent. The financial impact of this change in benefit entitlement is a loss of £2,780 a year for each child. To apply, a woman has to complete a support for a child conceived without your consent form, with the help of an approved third-party professional. The UK Government considers this to be either a healthcare professional, likely to be a doctor, a health visitor, a midwife or nurse, a registered social worker, or a specialist third sector support agency. The Scottish Government produced guidance in October 2018 from the Chief Medical Officer, Chief Nursing Officer and Chief Social Work Officer for staff being asked to assist with a claim. This forms the basis of the guidance being issued to Falkirk Council staff. The guidance is attached at Appendix 1 to this report. Implications for Falkirk Council are contained within Section 4 of this report. Social workers will be expected to support women in the verification process. Their actions will be based on following the Scottish Social Services Council Code of Practice. Their focus will be on respecting and maintaining the dignity of people using services, respecting confidentiality and protecting and promoting the rights and interests of people accessing services. Frontline staff in housing services and finance that deal with benefits may be approached for assistance, and they also need to know how to refer an individual on to social work for assistance. Guidance provided has been developed to ensure that staff will know how to respond to potential claimants, including signposting to the right people and services, and taking the necessary steps that support people on low income to access benefits that they are entitled to. Falkirk Council currently commissions services to provide support for people who have experienced trauma. This includes sexual violence and domestic abuse. These services will not be involved in the verification process. Supplementary to the Scottish Government guidance, the Council is briefing staff, as set out in Appendix 2 to this report, to ensure that if an individual approaches Falkirk Council for support, she will be directed to an appropriate professional to assist her. Information on specialist agencies can be provided along with signposting or referring people for further support. Support is available for staff who themselves may be affected by their involvement in this process. In relation to financial and resource implications at Section 6, this is not expected to have significant financial implications for the Council. It is unlikely that providing validation to claimants will have significant resource implications due to the low number of expected requests. Social workers will, however, have to record their involvement and provide justification for their decision regarding validation. There is a risk that failure to prepare staff to respond to requests for confirmation results in people being unable to claim benefits that they are entitled to, further increasing child poverty in the Falkirk area. There are some possible equalities issues with the 2-child limit to benefits, particularly around the impact on families who hold a particular religious belief. To conclude, Falkirk Council has developed guidance for staff in housing, finance and social work services to ensure that staff are aware of the process of obtaining benefits for children conceived without consent and understand the process of verification. This guidance also highlights the specialist support services that are available to help people affected by these issues. At section 2 of this report, the Education Executive is asked to note the guidance being provided to social work and relevant housing and finance staff. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Colley.
Thank you very much for that. I'm glad that this report's come forward. I don't think I've made any secret of my extreme distaste at the 2-child cap, but also this particular policy. I think it's, well, quite frankly, disgusting. However, this paper is very, very necessary. It's a necessary step to ensure that we can support both staff and women, giving staff the right support and information to help women, and to help women in disclosing such personal information that they are put in touch with the right support should they wish this. I'm sad that we have to have this report. I'm sad that this is in place, but I would thank all those involved who've developed this guidance to be able to support our staff and women.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Murtagh.
Indeed, and I would echo Councillor Colley's words. I think there isn't the richness in the English language to express the disgust at how I think many of us feel at having to bring forward such measures. I'm very glad that they are. I'm very glad at the way that they've been brought forward and the thought that's been put into them for our own staff as well, who will face significant challenges. It's been acknowledged within the report that the universal condemnation has also come from all agencies who are supportive of women in these situations, and the difficulty in providing support, and that they themselves will not be involved in the process of filling out those forms, and that we have to acknowledge our own processes in dealing with that. I think it's particularly poignant that in the week preceding the legislation on domestic abuse going live in Scotland, that when you're talking about, and Sarah's mentioned it in her summary there, the impact of coercive control in relationships, and that's just one of the criteria which a woman may put down as an exemption to qualify for this, that we have a UK government policy which absolutely fails to understand the fundamental nature of coercive control and of psychological abuse in a policy designed for accessing finance, and particularly in that stipulation of not being in order to even qualify on the form, not being able to be living with that current partner, and the timing of that when you think about somebody becoming pregnant and what's going to have to be claiming for that child, the complicated nature of dealing with issues of domestic abuse, dealing with coercive control, is summed up that our legislature in Westminster clearly cannot comprehend the impact that this legislation is having, and not just on the very few individuals who might be affected and come forward, but in the message it's sending to society as a whole, that we've come so far to understand that rape and sexual violence happens within relationships, within marriages, that coercive control is an element, and psychological control that we must address going forward. Everybody who accesses that sort of support does so in a slightly different way on an individual basis. I can't conceive of a scenario where actually putting down on a form would be the best step forward for you to access support, and to be put in a decision where you would have to even consider for the financial implications of yourself and your children, whether you should disclose that and whether you should access support. I think it's incumbent on us all sitting around this table to continue to send that message that although we're putting in these mitigating procedures, this needs to be repealed and overturned at a UK government level, and that there are many who continue at Westminster within the SNP, Alison Thulis, but many others across parties up and down the country, at Holyrood and at Westminster, and all our civil society who are completely against this and continue that campaign, and we should continue to do so. I'd just like to finally say that I think on a personal level, whatever the context of violence and sexual violence, whether that's within a relationship or whether that's within the context of, you know, a stranger in a dark alley, and all things in between. The pressure to disclose that on a financial for financial benefit should be abhorred by everybody. And as a survivor myself of sexual violence, I know how difficult it is to be able to address that and to be able to even say those things out loud in a time frame which is taken away from you is an abuse in itself. I think we can't send that message stronger enough from all bodies and from around this table that we completely call on that to be overturned, no matter what mitigation factors we can put in place.
Okay, Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, Convener. I'm going to be quite concise. I fell pregnant with my third child, and 2 months later my husband was made redundant, and I think that this, as has been said, is an absolute abomination. And I'm just going to quickly quote the First Minister, but you never thought you'd hear that one. And it says that the UK government's child tax credit reform is an abomination and it should be scrapped. And that this policy was illustrative of the damage that a Tory government can do. And on that note, I'll finish.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Bissett?
I would just like to echo the comments that have been said already. I think this is abhorrent and appalling, and I had hoped that the UK government would have pulled it by now, given the level of disgust against it. And I think everybody in this council would surely join us in writing to the UK government and lobbying them a bit more forcefully to try and get them to repeal it. I think Councillor Murtagh was very succinct and honest in what she said, and it does bring home just how horrific this is, really, and I'm surprised it's continued as long as this. But I'm glad we do have this documentation here to support people, and I think that's about all I have to say on the matter, really.
I agree that, that it's abhorrent and we should never have to be here. But we do have a number of MPs down at Westminster that I do know that are lobbying on a regular basis to have this repealed, and perhaps some collaboration down there would be the better way to go from our joint parties and working together on this. Councillor Alexander? Just
a quick question, Convener. The obviously speed in which we can get support to people that find themselves in these circumstances are important, and just wondering if the referral process has been shortened to as possible shortest, so that these people can get support very quickly on the basis of the initial contact.
Yes, and that, Councillor, is exactly what we're seeking to achieve with this proposal, by making sure that staff across the piece are briefed, so that we can try and minimise as much distress as possible for a woman making that really, really difficult decision to actually pursue this benefit. That is done in any call in for support is met with a really appropriate response, not looking for any additional information or detail, but simply a very, very quick and prompt signpost to the appropriate person. In terms of how quickly then that process moves after the verification report has been undertaken and sent off, I don't know. We haven't had yet an experience of having to complete the verification form, but I will be able to watch that as we move forward. We've been very, very careful about what data has been recorded on this. We've been really thoughtful about that too, but we do need to know where qualified social workers are completing verification reports, so that detail has been worked up, and I'll be able to bring that back in due course.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. And that brings this morning's Education Executive to a conclusion. Can I thank people for their attendance?